Good evening and welcome. This is the Burnsville City Council work session, and I'll call our work session to order. And our work sessions are informal, and we get right to the heart of the agenda. So the first item on the agenda is the maximum tax levy for 2016, and this is part of our budget discussion. And this evening, presenting will be our city manager, Heather Johnston, and Kelly Stry, our finance director. Heather, you're going to have a few words to
Madam Mayor, I just want to, by way of introduction, and I won't steal I always steal Kelly's thunder. I'm going to try not to do that. But what I want to remind folks is that this is the maximum tax levy that we're discussing. Staff will continue to work over the next 2 months to try and get that number lower, as we always do. We've gotten some input from the council already on some additional things we're supposed to be looking at, and so we are continuing to do that. But some of those items have not been included to date, and Ms. Stry will go over that for you all. But so I just want to emphasize that it's the maximum. We have to set that statutorily before September 15th. And so we want to make sure that we are going in the right path for what we bring to you in September. With that, Ms. Stry has a lot more information for you, so I'm going to turn it over to her.
Okay, thank you. We always start with where we are in the budget process. We've had a couple meetings already in June to go over the big picture and projections, high-level projections for the budget. And then in July, you addressed some revenue options and gave us some direction on things to pursue. As Ms. Johnson talked about, that we are still working on those. Those are not included in our maximum tax levy numbers at this time. And today you are talking about setting the maximum tax, which will happen the first meeting in September. We are required by law before the end of September to set that. There are no levy limits in place for 2016. And these are the percentages, the tax rates that will be used on the proposed property tax statements that people receive in November, that will tell them what the maximum amount of tax they'll have on their particular piece of property. So we can go down from this number, but we cannot go up from this number. We're currently in the process of preparing the very detailed proposed budgets. We've got more than 50 people throughout the organization that have been working really since June on looking at each and every line item in their budget, looking at the historical trends and what the future holds in their areas and the needs that they have. We're continuing to refine those estimates and identify efficiency savings. The departments will present to you October 27th challenges for their particular areas at a council work session. You will receive your complete proposed budget on November 1st, or before November 1st. I believe that's a Sunday, so you'll get it before November 1st. And you will adopt a final tax levy on December 8th. The proposed max levy, in June we brought to you an estimate based on some big broad projections that we are seeing about a need for about a 3.7% increase in the tax levy for current services. We have reduced that at this point to 3.5%. We also talked about the facility improvement plan and the needs to fund that, and you gave us some direction to proceed in preparing some estimates on that. We are projecting in this maximum tax that the increase that would be needed, and this is a very broad brush stroke at this point in time, we would spread that over 2 years, and we have projected $420,000 increase in debt service, or 1.4% in tax levy for that facilities improvement, and then there would be another step the following year. We talked in July about revenues, and we talked about franchise fees, reseller license and transaction fees, and gambling fees. And we are going to be bringing to you some options in those areas and what those might generate, but those have not been included at this point because they need further review. The tax levy is in, most of it is in the general fund, $26 million, and we're projecting that based on current service levels and inflationary projections, we will need to increase $940,000, or about 3.2% increase in the levy. Our existing debt service does not need any additional levy, so there's nothing in the debt service, and that's the existing, not including the facility plan. The Emerald Ash Borer plan that you've had in place has a $50,000 planned increase, and the Infrastructure Trust Fund also $50,000, and then the Economic Development Authority, or the EDA levy, would be $25,000, and that again is as planned in your financial plans, the 5-year plans that you see every year. So that, without the facilities plan debt levy, results in about a 3.5% increase in the levy, or around $1 million, just over $1 million. When you add in the $420,000 for the first year of the facilities plan debt service, you're at 4.9%. This is a slide that we show you every time I think we come together, is how much of the levy increase is borne by new construction. So we have new properties, new valuation within the city that brings new tax base to the city. The new construction for 2016 is estimated to generate about $150,000 worth of taxes. That means of the remaining increase that's proposed here, the existing tax base would bear $920,000, or about 3%. And then on top of, we've broken it, we keep leaving the facilities debt as a separate line item, so you can see how that's affecting all of the changes. So the facilities debt service fund, debt service increase would be about $420,000, or 1.4%. That would be spread to both existing and new valuation. The facilities study, very broad preliminary estimates would mean that the short-term needs about $10 million bond, $825,000 annual debt service for 15 years. We can structure that in a variety of ways, and we're still looking at what the total bond would be and facilities amount would be. And so that is where the $420,000 comes from, is splitting that over 2 years. Fund balance is always good to consider when we're looking at our budget. Where are we? Where is the financial position of the city? At the end of 2014, we had about a $4.1 million contingency balance, and with the 2015 budget, which we had projected to use some fund balance in the 2015 budget, that would reduce it to an estimated 3.8. Items that we are looking at in the 2016 budget to be covered by fund balance would be the continued use of fund balance to fund a portion of the Ice Center debt, $140,000 a year. We're in year 5 of that, of 10 years. Sustainability fund, we would use restricted fund balance of $135,000 to fund our recycling and sustainability. That is also consistent with prior years. That particular portion of the fund balance is reserved for only that type of activity, so that is used out of restricted fund balance. The comp plan update that is coming up is going to cost us somewhere in the neighborhood of $300,000 to $400,000 over 2 years. So that is a one-time kind of expense, and so we're projecting to use fund balance for that. So that would be about $200,000 each year of the next 2 years. And for elections, that's another one. that we have consistently used fund balance for, because it is an every other year kind of thing. Rather than have the levy go up and down for the elections, we use our available fund balance to fund that, to keep the levy on a steady course. And then you also had given us some direction to include another monument for $50,000. Other potential items, as we're reviewing the details of what the departments have sent to us for the budget, might be other capital or one-time expenditures or carry forward of one-time revenue from 2014 or 2015 if we have identified some.
Dan?
The debt, Ice Center debt service transfer on your little stick diagram that showed the segments of the fund
Yes.
balance, that's in there, right?
Yeah.
That's already sort of accounted for in that little purple.
The purple,
Yeah.
Right.
you're right.
So the rest of what's on that following screen that you just came back to is talking about the 3.8,
Yes,
the green,
yes.
Yeah.
on our little test strip.
And when we factor those in, now this is that same slide, only with the years projected out. This is what the fund balance would look like. So your fund balance would still maintain at a pretty stable level and would still give you a contingency portion of the fund balance.
Which is actually in excess of the 2 million that we've identified as what we really, all we
Correct.
really feel we need
Yeah.
for
For
emergencies.
emergency.
We're basically a 1.5 million above that on average every year. And I believe I did some quick math outside of the purple allocation of the 140, was the rest totaling about 5, 10, or 20 or something like that. If you go back to your other slide that had those. Oop,
Oh,
not that one.
I'm sorry.
There you go. There, so not counting that 140, so the sustainability of 135, the 200, is that per year for the comp plan?
No,
No.
yeah,
It would be
200
2
per year, and that's for 2 years, and then it's 400 total, and then we'll do that again in the next 10 years.
Yes,
And well,
so,
there's going to be inflationary in that as well.
right, so we'd be using 335 plus elections, 465 plus the monument,
And
515. So 515 out of that 3.8, or 3.5, I think was one the next year.
And actually, the sustainability comes out of a reserved,
Yeah.
restricted there,
It's
the
the
red
restricted from
at the
the,
bottom.
yeah.
Oh, down there,
That's the
okay, so
host- the
if I
host
pull it out.
fees.
So we have, so it's more like 385 roughly of things that we've identified that we've said, let's use that one-time money, take care of those things. And that 3.5, so we're still 1.1-ish million of in excess of reserves, in excess of the 2 million that we have not determined that we want to spend on anything.
Yeah. We don't touch the 35% because that's cash flow.
Yeah, I'm just talking
Yeah.
about
Yeah,
the green
un-
part of
the
our
un-
color.
The unrestricted.
Yep. So, okay. One last question. How many other monuments do we have to complete the whole monument process?
Steve, you want to answer that?
The second monument will complete Highway 13. I think on 35, we're looking at maybe 1 or 2 monuments. We think the north end between the bridge and the signs, the existing signs with our monumentation on the billboards. We think that kind of gives enough identity that and the bridge, we're looking at incorporating some Burnsville logo into the new river bridge as you cross. So we don't think there'll need to be anything in the north. So you'd have potentially something on the south end,
Yeah.
on city right-of-way coming north on 35,
Yep.
potentially something on city property on 35E, although that's going to be difficult. The right-of-way is so wide. That would leave probably the council to decide, do you want to do something? 42 is really the only other major roadway that we probably would look at putting something on. And of course, that would have to be outside the county's right-of-way, but cities have done that outside the right-of-way. So we'd look
Yeah.
at that. So maybe in the neighborhood after this one, 3 or 4 max, probably.
And are they all roughly about 50 grand? Is that?
Yeah, it's generally, we've added some lighting for some additional costs, but our lighting funds pay for that money. So,
Gotcha.
yeah, the one we did last year was 44,000, I believe. So we don't see those prices changing too dramatically. That one was on the side of a hill, so it was a little more expensive too because we added the foundation to it and stuff. So we think 50 is adequate to do those.
Okay. Well, I know we're sort of spacing it out because we were trying to manage it within I think a particular budget. Didn't want to necessarily do it all at once, but based on the projection of our green area of having that much in excess funds, I'm wondering why we don't just consider pulling the trigger and get it done, and get all the monuments put in and done and over with.
I think we should have that discussion rather than just say, okay, let's get it all done. And yet there are some other needs that we have in place that I think we ought to take a look at as well.
I'm sure there's a list of things coming.
Yeah, there is. Well, there's the facilities plan and, you know, Loch Lomond, that concession stand, that's a big nut that we have to crack.
Yes, and
And
so,
I think that's coming up in a facilities plan, and we'll take a look at that. I think that's going to be scheduled for when, Heather?
Well, we don't currently have the facility for Loch Levon. That's not coming up right away. I think we're going to look at that in terms of the overall CIP, which I think is also where we have our monuments. And so that is coming up at the end of November, and so that would be an appropriate time to talk about some of these trade-offs.
Yeah, because there's so much in the facilities plan as well as the other, so we need to have that discussion in that, around that space of time, because there's so much. Bill?
And just as a point of information to that end, it's my understanding that, when we look at the utility and electronic fees, as early as could come to fruition if this council so decided by 2016. Is that correct?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Coughlin, we're working toward that goal. I think you've got we talked about possibly having that dedicated to facilities and or infrastructure. And so right now we've got the debt levy, the 1.4 million, and it's spread 1.4 million this year and 1.2 next year.
Yeah.
1.4 next year.
Oh,
1
percent, yes.
Yeah, and so basically what we're trying to do is base it out, and then potentially if we can get the facility or the utilities franchise fees in place, then that would impact how much.
So
would
let
have to
me
be levied
try it
next
again.
year.
So the earliest we could, if we so decided, it would be 2016, correct?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Coughlin,
Yeah.
yes, if everything went
Right,
perfectly,
right,
it would be
perfect.
20.
That's it's early. So I think what you were alluding to
Is
is.
that let's have the discussion when
right,
we have the
right.
CIP and the facilities.
400,000 on the
Yeah, because the
capital.
park master plan is part of the CIP also.
Correct, so, yes.
yes, I'm aware of the timetable and how much time it takes. I brought that up because I want to throw that out now as an idea for something we consider. Each time we put a monument in, we hear a certain
Yeah.
support and or opposition to it. And by spacing it out, I feel like we're
Yeah.
doing the same thing every year with the street
Yeah,
assessments. We're sort of sending ourselves through that same pain over and over again.
Yeah.
And the cost really isn't that much with the size of the reserves that we have, but I
15
know that.
years that we've been patient about this. I'm one who would like to see it get done.
I thought
But
so.
there were all these other priorities that always seem so, yeah. I'm-
And the Loch Lomond, I know that's part of a bigger discussion. The other thing I want to get to outside of that was what of this facilities, and I know we're going to get that, what of that excess funds that we're holding on to, which I don't like. You know me. I don't like hanging on to $1 million, $1 or $2 a year after year after year and leaving it there. So what of that monies can we put, and this is a discussion we'll have when we have the capital fund, can we put toward this bigger facilities project that we're taking on? Because a lot of that is one-time capital. And how can that help mitigate some of the
And that's what I
the
was
tax
trying to
increase.
allude to.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Heather?
Madam Mayor and Minister, I can also jump in here, but I think what we will do is when we look at a full financing plan, when we have a better number, we may come to you with a combination of bonding and some of the one-time funds.
Great.
So what we'll try to do is figure out what makes it, frankly, what is the best deal for the
Sure.
taxpayers of this.
Yeah,
this
and how
year.
Great.
to leverage our resources.
Right. So
All
it
of
may, now you're stealing Mid-Stride's thunder. We may, in fact,
Oops.
come forward with.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, we'll be, I think staff is looking at some funding mechanisms that include some of this, and also looking at our ability. We have two AAA bond ratings, and so there's some opportunities there in leveraging all of that resource. We'll go back to you, Ms. Strike.
Okay. We do also have challenges in the equipment and facilities.
Yeah, and all
Vehicles
of our,
fund.
because we
so
delayed the
that-
vehicles plan.
that will all be part of, as we address the facilities plan and those other capital needs as well.
Thank you.
We touched on that slide already. This is an annual slide. Your policy says that we'll consider annually whether you want to transfer some fund balance to the EDA fund, and we do not propose that at this time. So what is driving the needs for additional tax revenues really stems primarily from maintaining the service funding for those areas that are primarily funded by tax levy. Public safety, parks and street maintenance being probably the largest areas in that. Healthcare costs continue to increase. We've got phased-in minimum wage increases, our increased funding for the Emerald Ash Borer preparation plans. We have our Parks Capital funding increases. That is a plan we talk about each year, that there were cuts made quite a number of years ago that have been phased back in as we try to maintain the system of parks and assets that the city has. Street maintenance, which is your ITF levy, and then as I referred to earlier, to the equipment, vehicles, and improvement and facilities replacements, we have a lot of deferred maintenance in those areas. We've really stretched out the replacement schedules on those and continue to manage those as best we can, but there are replacement needs that do come up. This very detailed slide is similar to one that you saw in June. Really the number that changed from June is our some slight changes to increase into our estimates in non-tax revenues and use of reserves to bring our total down to 3.5. The percent increase in the taxes for the next 5 years, as we always look at not just next year, but look at how our decisions that we're proposing here might affect the next 5 years. You're seeing 2 higher years in 2016 and 2017, really driven by that facilities plan increase, and then back down to the 3% range for the 3 out years. How does that look compared to where we were last November and December when you were determining the 2015 budget and we were looking out to 2016? That's the green bar, and then the purple bars are what we looked at in June. The orange bars are where we are now, and really the significant change happened because we incorporated that facilities plan debt service. Infrastructure Trust Fund, where our plan is to stay the course as we've gotten direction from you, so that's a $50,000 annual increase to that fund. The goal is to be pay-go for streets. We've achieved that, and we're not proposing any new debt for the ITF fund. And your fund balance will remain within the goals for that fund. Some of our other capital plans, we've got the Parks Capital. We've proposed $100,000, and that is increase to that fund. That is consistent with the plans you've seen over the last few years. This is the 2016 plan. The Equipment, Vehicle, and Facilities Fund has a $65,000 increase as planned. Aging facilities and capital equipment maintenance are challenges. We will, as we address the facilities improvement plan, if there are items that are on the current CIP that can be replaced by those items, we will be adjusting that particular fund as well. And then IT capital. Last year we did not increase this fund, but we're going back to the plan for 2016. So that really brings us, see, I did go very quickly.
You did very well, very, very well.
Surprised myself even. To your discussion on where this max tax levy will be the documents that we need to prepare for the county for your approval at the next meeting in September. The plan includes these capital plans and special plans that we've discussed before, and you've given us direction to stay the course on those. We're just checking back in with you that that's still the case.
Still the case to stay the course? Yep.
I don't know, is
Okay.
the bug still a threat?
Yeah, it's now over in Bloomington, and I don't know,
I think it's in Egan now, too.
it's in Egan now too, so it's coming right across.
Park.
Huh?
It's in Lebanon Park.
Oh, well, if it's in Lebanon Park? Yeah, okay, I see Commissioner Workman, and she's nodding her head. So it's very close. It's something we have to take care of. We have no control over the bug.
Okay. Then, moving on, the facilities plan is the big thing that we've talked about on most of the slides tonight, that it's affecting your levy. Do you have any further direction for staff on the facilities plan or a funding plan?
Bill?
Yes, you're going to look at our excess, I assume you're going to look at our excess amount in reserve costs, you're going to look at some,
That,
Options.
that and our
Yeah.
bonding.
yeah, but
So, yeah, Mary?
Which I would expect, and I'm glad Bill brought that up. But I'm also glad to see that you did include in the budget debt service, because I think that we have to
Yeah.
prepare for that. So I appreciate you doing that. I think that was very prudent.
Well, it's a tool that we don't use very much, but it's available to us because we do great financial planning and we are strong financially. And so we're able, because of those 2 AAA bond ratings, to be able to get money very cheap to do the things that need to be done. These are assets that belong to the community. This is our fiduciary responsibility to make sure that the assets of the community are continuously improved, maintained, and sustained, not just for the people today, but for the people who are going to be following us. And boy, we hit 50 years and we're showing all our age in every way, not only our facility.
Madam Mayor.
Yeah.
Members of the council, you'll see too that there are a number of other cities about this that are a similar age as we are that are now investing in their facilities. Just because
Hey, listen, you and I have gone into many cities who have built their city halls and improved their city halls because of the age of their facilities, from Maple Grove to Plymouth to Edina. And so it's not just us. It's just what we have to do to maintain the assets of the community. And it's like any of us with our houses. We have to repair the roofs, put in new equipment because they're failing. And I know Councilmember Sherry had a huge improvement for her property in the last couple of years.
And the same, the house is nearly 50 years old, and
Oh,
things break. But I think that even on a personal level with my house, but I think that what we really, it's not just the condition of the buildings that we have to look at, but we do not want the condition of our buildings to
Deteriorate.
impact the performance of our people. And I think that you can, particularly we did the tour of the police department,
and the
fire facilities. I mean, there's a point where you can make do, but then there's a point where you do hinder the performance of your staff. And I think that we really need to be ahead of that, not behind it.
Yeah. And we've been lagging on that.
Yeah.
And now we're taking care of all those things. Dan?
Agreed. I just want to echo Councilmember Sherry with the PD tour. I think since I've been on council '07, we have invested in some technology and equipment and kept the PD, I think, well-equipped, but we never looked at the house that they lived in.
Right.
And when
And
we got
it's
that tour,
bad.
we realized that we were focusing and I think doing pretty well in giving them what they need for tools, but for a place to conduct the investigations and the crime scene and these other things and just working space,
Yeah.
we absolutely positively blew it there. And
Well-
I'm going to, obviously, I think I've said this, I'm going to be very strongly in favor of supporting that project and the fire project. And whereas I have an issue that I've stated clearly at the last budget meeting with I call it the foundational part of the budget, the 3.5 that I want to be for existing taxpayers at 2%, that 1.5 or 1.4 is a completely different discussion. It's a reinvestment of a capital
Yeah.
investment in the long term of the city. It's not the operational side, which is more the other part of levy. And that doesn't scare me at all.
No.
Whatever it takes, we need to do it.
And I think we all agree because there are many things that were not part of our PD or fire's function that have been pushed down from the state level for us to now, we're doing crime scene investigations and all of those things that wasn't part of our, but we need to make sure, I mean, when we see crime scene investigation in the garage,
Yeah.
and we need a garage for those cars to come in and where they can do some processing work also. So there's some work we need to do.
That hinders productivity
Yeah.
significantly. We probably don't know how bad it is until we rectify it and we find out how much the productivity,
Yeah.
the work environment, morale, all that stuff is going to benefit.
So I'm glad, and so I want to thank Heather and Dana and staff in doing that facility study because it is due.
Agreed.
So thank you.
It's not easy too. Thanks for
Yeah.
That's a big
Yeah.
it's a big project.
And it was good for us to take that tour and really get to know what's going on.
Okay. So in June, we looked at 3.7% increase, plus the increase of the debt service levy. As I mentioned before, staff is still currently working on identifying efficiencies and savings to reduce expense, and then those revenue options, identifying the right mix of those items and the timing of this. As Heather mentioned on the franchise fee, that is not something that can happen so quickly, so we do have to take our time on that. So the question for the maximum tax is, right now, we're proposing 3.5% increase plus 1.4% for the debt levy. Do you have any specific suggestions for staff to prepare the max tax levy for September?
Yeah, and if everyone remembers, this is just the max tax, and we always drill deep and do the deep dive, and staff has been very good in coming up in December with,
But I think we've had some of those discussions.
Yeah, we
To
have.
answer that question in the last 10 minutes.
Yeah.
So you're okay with this, with the max tax?
Well, as long as they factor in what we've talked about as well.
Yeah, that's going to come in the following discussions. This is just the max tax. Mary?
First of all, I want to thank staff for the work you've done already, chipping away at this, so keep chipping.
Yeah.
Which I know you
3.7 to
will.
5.
And also you're looking at revenue offsets. But again, thank you for your work. My feeling in a general sense is that we said what we felt we needed, and I feel, it's one thing to say you need something, but then it's another thing to fund it, and I think we have to fund it.
Yeah, I agree with you.
I agree.
Suzanne?
No,
Okay.
I agree with
Okay.
Mary on this.
Yeah.
Many things have been put off for too long. We need to do it.
Okay. Dan?
Well, since we're not voting on a budget, my feelings about
Yeah.
the 3.5
Yeah.
existing taxpayers is 2% is my number, but as a max tax, and I understand that staff is still working very hard to find some more savings and efficiencies, which my hat's off to them. That's the job they have. And I know we had a recent revenue and fees discussion that'll be incorporated in this, which is going to help. It's not going to cure. It's not a silver bullet, but it will help. And I don't have a problem with those fees being, put at a level that puts us, not at the most expensive city, for instance, but within our policy.
Yeah. And I also want the council to know that when that article hit the paper, Lions will be asking to come before us to speak to the impact on the work that they do on a community-wide. And so know that that's going to happen, because that was brought up at our Lions meeting. So there is concern on how it will impact how Lions give to the community as a whole.
Sure.
But also they did their research with state statute and how that money, if we say we're going to take the levy on these things, and they checked with the gaming lawyers how that's going to be. And it's so I'm going to let them do that. But when I look at what we have to stay the course with what we've been talking about from June, and our staff does a great job of really being conservative, and they also know how we feel about all of these things. The drivers and the pressures for us is, in any company, health insurance continues to go up. That's there. Employee wages and benefits, that's all part of doing business. And then, of course, the minimum wage legislation and act. That has an impact on us. So these are some of the things that are out of our control, but we have to address them. So I agree with everyone that we stay the course and move with the max tax as presented by staff. Okay?
Thank you.
You, staff has direction?
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Move to the next item, and this is the discussion on the Planning Commission's review of the zoning ordinance regulations for solar energy systems and devices. Deb Garros, as city planner, is presenting this item, and her boss, Ms. Faulkner, our community development director, is also present for answering any questions. And we also have members of the Planning Commission present, so, yeah. Yeah. So, and if you can introduce yourselves for our listening audience, that would be great. And it's good to see our new commissioner here. And thank you for coming.
Go ahead. Steve Levy, new Commissioner, Alden.
Yes,
Jim Bradrick, Planning Commission.
thank you.
New
I know-
Chairman. Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
And that's right, you were just elected.
That happened last night.
You were just elected, and so that was last night.
Yes.
Oh, very good, congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah. So thank you, first of all, for the work that you've already done and that you will continue to do on this particular subject. Deb?
Thank you, Mayor and council members. We do have some information to hand out. It was provided by another commissioner, Mr. Stephen Banky, who wanted to be here tonight but was not able to. So I can summarize this, but he wanted his comments.
To be put into the record, and that's good. But you will just give us an overview of what his remarks are. So this is a follow-up from the work that you all did together, or was he not present?
He was present at the discussions that the Planning Commission had. This item is really a work plan item that was on the Planning Commission's work plan for this year. We had two different discussions, work session where the Planning Commission went through information and staff provided a lot of background material in terms of research and what's happening in the state of Minnesota and why we're hearing so much about it, and what we should look at in terms of what our current ordinance has and if there should be any changes. The Planning Commission spent as I said, two almost full evenings reviewing this work. And what we have for the council tonight is an overview of what they did. And also we are looking for feedback from the council to determine if you feel that there is a need to look at our ordinance and prepare a draft ordinance, work through the Planning Commission. They would hold a public hearing and bring it back to you, or if we should leave things as they are currently. On this first slide, I'll just go through this quickly. What I really want to advise council of is that the solar technology has really expanded in leaps and bounds.
And evolved quite
Yes.
a bit.
Our ordinance that we have in effect now was put into effect in 1982. So a lot has changed, especially in the past 5 or 6 years, let alone 30 plus years. And what this graphic shows basically is the price of solar, and these are for like private installation type things, but it has come way down in the past couple of years and anticipated to even go down further. So it's become much more affordable and much more, I guess, reliable than what we had in the past. The other thing that is driving solar and wind energy, all sorts of alternative energies, is that the state of Minnesota does have reduction guidelines that they've implemented. They're looking at, excuse my eyesight, but, I am over 50, so I'll just state that for the record.
We're all
I totally
struggling
get that.
with old eyes, Deb. It's okay. I just...
But they're looking at a goal of a 15% reduction in carbon emissions by 2015, and by 2050, an 80% reduction. And they're looking for all of us as the public sector to meet those goals.
And you can also let the public know that the city of Burnsville has far exceeded that 15% reduction.
Yes, we fortunately have very forward-thinking council, have for a long time in the sustainability and
doing
yes.
a lot of the enforcements in those.
And so we are seeing the benefits of some of those things. The next slide I want to show you is this is the electric utility areas within the city. And the most important thing about this is the top purple area. That is Xcel's service area.
Guess what would happen? It's already happening because they stopped coal production.
Exactly.
April 15th.
The legislature enacted coal reduction requirements. You heard about this through the federal government. The president also has indicated this. The types of programs that are out today and that the legislature has recently made available in terms of funding and different opportunities to make solar more workable for the private and public sector, a lot of that is on Xcel's shoulders. So they have a lot of great programs that are put into place. Unfortunately, they're only about a third of our service area. Dakota Electric is looking at doing some things, but basically kind of the feeling from the other electric utilities is, until Xcel needs to make some changes. One of the things that our public works director had talked about is with street lighting and replacing LED lights. Until Xcel needs to do these things, we're really not going to, we're not going to forge into those. So in respect, the types of information that we talked about with the Planning Commission and the programs that you're going to be discussing after our review tonight with Mr. Beck really are kind of tied to these things that are happening with the PUC and some of these major electric utilities. In looking at the city's ordinance, our current regulations allow for, in residential districts, that you can have solar panels, solar installations. pretty much as long as they are screened. In commercial and industrial areas, pretty much the same thing, meaning that we really do not have much in terms of provisions or performance standards or ways to guide installations. The community solar gardens, this is really taking off, and Mr. Beck will get into this later, but Minneapolis and several communities are installing solar gardens. Usually you will find these larger installations in areas that have either quite a bit of public land available or areas that are developing, the Lakevilles, Apple Valleys, et cetera, with the more rural land areas.
Deb, Rosemount just put in a community garden. Was that on Flint Hill property?
I am not sure of the location of that. I would have to check that, but I know
Yeah,
that
I
they
think
have.
you should, because that was a big thing that, reading the paper and,
Yes.
and they, so I don't know if it was a city or is it Flint Hill?
I know that the city they updated their ordinance
Yeah.
just last year to allow for those.
Yeah.
The actual property, I would need to check into that. I know in Scott County, also the Blue Lake Water Treatment Plant
Yeah.
has a large solar garden installation to help with costs, and they're one of the test sites, if you will, for metropolitan waste control.
Yeah.
Also,
Those would be good to know because that was a big one.
Yes.
At Rosemount.
Yes.
And I'm not quite sure if it's a public-private partnership with Flint Hills or if that's one on the university property at
Yep.
UMar.
we can certainly look into that, and Mr. Beck may have some more information on that as well. In terms of the discussions that we had with the Planning Commission, is that we don't have, because we're a fully developed community, a lot of large areas for these expansive types of systems. They can be set up on closed landfills. There are other states that have done that. Whether or not that's an option for anything here in Burnsville, we have had some individuals look at it. Some of the consulting companies that have worked with us in the past on our sustainability plan have also been working with the state and other governments for not only putting together the solar guidelines model ordinance that the PCA has, but also trying to get some of these solar gardens established. They've looked here in Burnsville. The site that they checked first was the current golf course site, the driving range. Have an issue there because there is not a good source of electrical power right at that location. There would have to be a new type of connection utility installed in order to make that work. In terms of overall gardens, I think with the Planning Commission we talked and thought that this would be something that might be applicable more as rooftop type installations to look at, but probably establishing it as a principal use, which we would need to change the ordinance to do, that may or may not be something that that Burnsville would be interested in, but something to look at more in depth.
And the other thing is that MBTA has a solar garden.
Yes.
On 13 and
Yes.
Nicollet. We did a PUD amendment to allow that, Jenny,
Yes.
if I remember. And I believe that they saved 25% when I was on. I think it was 25% that they save in electrical power because of the solar garden.
Yep.
But
We
but
do have a couple.
that we did through a PUD.
Yes, yes, and that's an accessory use. The
Yeah.
principal use being.
And that's what I saw in
the
your
station.
background.
Yes, and I think from the Planning Commission standpoint, they feel too that as an accessory use, it makes some sense to look at these. Really, most of the issues from their perspective aren't so much when you have the installations on rooftops or in areas that are not visible to the public from the public right-of-way. But when you get to the ground-mounted systems, they think that we probably need to beef up our ordinance and look at some performance standards in general. And I do have at the end of this, we have actually another solar array also on another building, and I have those two slides. Some of the things we looked at are just what's happening in some other states. Some of these are happening here. But just to give you an idea of what we're talking about, you have, larger arrays that can be put up. And these are probably the ones where the Planning Commission and staff feel we could use some guidance for these as to in what situations should or could these be located? Should there be restrictions on, if they are placed in the front yard versus a rear yard, commercial property versus residential, those types of things. Our ordinance is really silent on those types of factors. These are just some more examples so you can get an idea of the scale of some of these. And these are probably a little bit larger installation. The top right hand is a ball field. Possibility for the city to at some point get into this type of thing. There are many different types of installations that are happening out there. In terms of residential, which the commission and staff feel is probably more applicable to Burnsville, again, not so affected or concerned about rooftop installations, but these types of pole-mounted or ground-mounted systems, they think that there probably should be some closer looking at. This is an example of one. You just don't know. I mean, and some of these, as Mr. Banky's information suggests, some of these are older, older slides and older types of units. This technology is expanding very quickly, and there are even, and he has some of this in his information, there are even products that look like clear glass that are photovoltaic type things. So as we move, very quickly in that direction, this may be less and less of an issue to look at, but we still do have these types of installations. So that's really the point to look at. And some other things, if you don't do something so large. Top right hand, I believe that's an installation in Edina. That's something that the Planning Commission, indicated that they did not have an issue with. This type of installation, as long as it were screened, could be done just through a building permit today. It's on an accessory building. Some of the other types of things would be when they're raised above the roof, on posts, those types of things. Should we take a little bit closer look at those? The bottom left-hand side is a ground site, and in that particular instance, the planning commissioners were fine with that. It's in an area where it makes sense. You can do it in with landscaping. It looks good, but there should be some performance standards just to identify what you would like to see. To kind of guide this type of installation as opposed to some of the others.
Because I've seen the upper left hand. It
Yes.
looks just like you have tile on your roof, and it's very nicely done.
Yes.
The one on the other side.
The Planning Commission looked at that. One of the things that we provided for them is an example of architectural guidelines, for lack of a better term. But what some communities have done out on the West Coast, and really showing, they did it very simply, pluses, minuses, for this is kind of what we're going for, what we'd like to see in an installation, this not so much. Just kind of to guide people, something that could be handed out at the time of building permit to kind of give some instruction, and that's something that we probably would like to look at working with as well as the ordinance amendments. This would be another type of wall installation, industrial type area. If nobody can see it, probably not an issue. If it's on the front of the building, maybe an issue. Again, our ordinance is silent on that at this point. These are just some illustrations of different types of installations that are occurring. The whole solar industry is really being led. Germany is one of the prime countries that is involved with solar power, and they're very far in front, and that is something that the state of Minnesota Metropolitan Council would like to capitalize on this as a renewable energy resource. For Minnesota, we actually have the same amount of solar capacity as, I believe it's Houston, Texas. We do not have the heat that's produced that they have down there, but the solar, the amount of exposure that we have for solar is the same. So it's kind of enlightening to, to think of that.
Yeah.
These, again, some other types of installations, really just examples. This is something, again, that the Planning Commission felt the large black area on the front of that building is a solar installation, and as long as something can be incorporated well into the architecture of a building integrated, the commissioners were satisfied that that's something that definitely we should be promoting, and solar is a good resource. If it's not, kind of like to maybe take a look at it at Planning Commission and council level, perhaps through a conditional use permit or planned unit development, something of that sort. This is another type of installation. Again, it's more of almost an exterior material as opposed to, just solar. But this just gives you some examples of what is available out there now. I believe these are in North Dakota. This is an example of kind of that guideline that we looked at, just with the pluses and minuses for, the type of installation where you have, as opposed to having a hodgepodge of these panels all over the place, that would probably be a minus. If you can put them together in a design, that makes some sense. There's some continuity. It looks just like a regular roof, that type of thing. That's great. And Planning Commission really felt that they did not have to see something like that. This again just shows the difference. The one on top, can't even really tell that ground installation's there. One on the bottom, you can. Just
Ground
color
installations would be tough in Minnesota in the wintertime.
They
Be covered up.
Yeah, they
Right.
do. A lot of these now have the ability to actually rotate on the axis so that they can rotate, and so that the snow actually will melt off. It really depends on what's out there, what the actual installation is going to be. This is a Burnsville example. It's the Northern Hydraulics on Cliff Road, and they did a rooftop install. This is probably about 3 years ago. When you're driving by, you can't see this.
Can't see it.
Yep, it's screened. We have not contacted them. I've wanted to do that just to see how that is going and how it's working for them. But this
Is it an internal grid, Deb? Is that whole business now an internal grid?
That I don't know. I don't know if they just use this to offset some of their electrical costs, or if this provides 100%.
Okay.
But that's some of the research that we'd like to do a little bit more checking on. And the last slide is the MBTA site. Again, this is something that's allowed. It's an accessory type use, and we did it through planned unit development. I think with that, I'd like to open it up for our illustrious commissioners who were able to come out tonight, and to add, if you have other things to add or thoughts, and leave it up to discussion for council. Thank you.
Do you have any other input that you want us to hear about?
Madam Mayor, council members, I think Deb kind of subbed up what we were looking for. There's huge opportunity out there. I had the opportunity to visit an apartment complex in the state of California for a university. It was a net zero building. The only problem was they somehow miscalculated how much energy a college student would use in a dormitory. And but they were able to then they fixed it. They put in carports, and they took the carports and they completely integrated the panels into the roof of the carport. You couldn't even tell they were there. So I guess our goal here is to if it architecturally fits in, do the right thing, the pluses and the minuses. If it's completely screened, we'd be support without coming in front of us. And there's just a lot of opportunity, as you saw in some great examples, where it looks just like the exterior of the building. And it's creating a great need in solving a lot of problems.
Okay.
I am struck by the picture on page 3 of Mr. Benke's handout. I see along Brunswick Parkway that we replace a lot of trees. Either they've gotten hit by cars or the salt and stuff has killed them.
They wouldn't be subject to the bug.
That's true. And I would venture that one or two of those along Brunswick Parkway would probably take care of most of the energy needs for the lighting along Brunswick Parkway. So they're, again, I've got a technical background, so I'm just guessing at numbers, but I would think that we might want to consider something like this in the future. And I don't know whether ordinance prohibits us from doing it, or as a community, or how we would approach that. It's still newbie at this thing, but looks fascinating. And it's a tree.
Yeah, it is. There are, when I was in Europe, saw a lot of these kinds of different innovations. Even with wind, they look very beautiful. They're not the big windmills that you see. It's even if it's on a house or something, they're smaller, but it generates a whole lot of energy. And so, but I think what we're going to be talking about is, this evening is, members of the council, the direction to staff in terms of an ordinance, setbacks and all of this. Community gardens, we don't have the space, as you already pointed out, but I don't think, council, that it would preclude a business who has a flat rooftop and they want to put a grid up there, but it's how we put an ordinance together that allows that. And we already have an example of that already in our community. Mary.
Madam Mayor, thank you. And I want to thank the Planning Commission. I watched the meetings, and Deb, you could take that show on the road. I could not believe the detail and the information you had, and you really got my attention when you mentioned the same solar power as Houston, Texas. I think that what I would like to see is an ordinance that deals with the aesthetics.
Aesthetics and the setbacks.
Yep, and the facts, because I think that, and maybe we'll get more into this when Garrett gives his presentation, but I remember the last time we got all excited about solar. And
Ballpark.
it just, you know what, you could cover all of God's green earth and it's not going to produce all the energy we need. A couple of things about the aesthetics, but that doesn't mean we can't offset some of our use. Absolutely, we see wonderful applications of this. So some of the aesthetics I am concerned about is that I would not want to see freestanding or pole-mounted in residential areas. I think that's just asking for trouble.
You don't want to see this tree?
No. Sorry, Steve. I'm concerned about the rooftops because I know that to get the same kind of solar energy in Houston, we have to rotate those panels to follow the sun, because you see in the winter how low the sun is on our horizon. So I want the Planning Commission to think about that.
Right.
So what would that look like?
But I think one of the things that we can do, and we've done in other incidents with mechanicals, is the parapets.
Well, I'm not concerned about the
screening.
commercial in
Yeah.
business. What I'm thinking about is a resident. So using my home, for example, I would not have the right pitch to get the January, February sun. I'd have to rotate the panels away from the pitch of my roof. So that's, you see what I'm saying? The pitch of my roof as it exists is not right to get the correct angle of the sun's rays. So to have if I had solar panels on that roof, I'd have to rotate them in January and February, December, January, February, to get that low angle sun.
Yeah.
I'd like Planning Commission to consider that.
Yeah. And
So,
then
but
what
is
it would look
but-
like, and it should have
Well,
good
and
visual
I'm
appeal.
concerned, I'm really concerned about the aesthetics. So
Me
whether
too.
it be for commercial or residential, but particularly in the residential areas. That's my thought.
Okay, Bill?
Well, you want to talk about gardens or not? Or do you want to wait for Barry?
Well, I think we can do it right away. We're not looking to do a community
Well,
garden.
Yeah, my problem with the garden is that, and I've read the background where, you're talking about a 25-year payback. Well, Deb, you were talking about the changes.
Yeah.
And some of this stuff, I kind of follow this.
Yeah.
Thank God I didn't invest in Solaris. Anyway, those of you know what that is. Anyway, this is amazing. I mean, a lot of this stuff I didn't even know existed. And so, and this is 5 or 6 years. So when you're talking about an investment in a big area for over 25 years, I just think it's going to be so out of date. I mean, look at these. What? These are 6 years old. They're out of date.
Yeah. And we don't have the land mass for us to
No.
even consider that.
I mean, if a private business wants to do it on their land.
I'm okay with a private business. It's just having a good ordinance and good setbacks and visual appeal and all of those kinds of things, and that it's compatible.
So just to make it more clear, I, agree with the mayor and Mary, and I believe I'm not overstating it. I'm generally fundamentally against a community garden concept on any city property. That's a city asset. That's, if it's a different matter if some years from now, Public Works or something come and say that we can cut costs in the ball field, just like any capital improvement or something that we do, that's different, but not any.
To offset the community needs and power.
Well, for right, but that was what we would do for ourselves, but not, so I'm fundamentally against the concept of community garden on any city property.
Suzanne?
Well, I also agree with all of you that same issues, especially in residential areas, making sure that it's aesthetically looks good and makes sense, and architecturally with the businesses also that it's making sense. And Steve just left paving. Did you see this?
Yeah,
With solar
and I've
energy?
seen it. I've seen it in some of the streets.
I suppose it's very expensive.
Well, it's probably also pretty hard for us, and it'll be interesting to
salt
hear
and-
his
Yeah, I know.
salt, the winter,
Curious about
and
that.
yeah.
And then I was kind of intrigued too, and Bill, when you talked about the, and I think you also mentioned this too, about the ball, maybe using it in a ballpark. If that's, I don't know, like Loch Levon, that's such a highly used park, does it make sense to, would it save money at all, or would it just?
Yeah, to offset our costs.
Yeah.
Those are all
Yeah.
things that are.
So I think we should definitely look into it, but sounds like we are in need of changing our ordinance and updating that. What was that, 82 since we?
Yeah, 1982.
It's time.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Dan?
Solar's been around for a long time, but the technology is quite
Change.
rapidly changing as battery storage and other technologies similar to this are advancing. So we absolutely need to update our ordinance and come up with a framework so our residents and businesses can move forward with the investment. There's more and more that's going to be done, and we need to be prepared and have an ordinance that's ready for it. It makes sense and doesn't overly restrict it, but also is respective of the aesthetics, because I agree, the pole mounted, I can't imagine why anyone would not do that in their front yard when they have the rooftop to do it on. So fully supportive of the, we don't have the property, so I'm not sure why we're discussing the solar farm, because we can't host the farm. Participating or buying it from a power company that's putting a solar farm somewhere else makes sense, but we can't unless the top of the waste management landfill is not going to be a golf course and can be a solar farm.
Well, there's, it's their property. They can use that and the methane, and they can have two different alternative energy sources, the methane they have now. So it might be easy for them to collect solar, collect methane, and send it to the grid. That's what they're doing now with the methane, is sending it to Excel grid. Jenny?
Madam Mayor, our response, they did inquire about that, was.
Waste management?
Yes, or a contractor, is that we would be open to that as long as it doesn't impede the city's end-use plan for that area. which is
Absolutely.
original, which they could not commit to.
Absolutely. I agree, 100%. No, that airspace has to be. Yeah, Mary.
Just one more thought I had, thank you, Madam Mayor, and that is that I believe it was brought up, I know it was brought up at your first meeting, and I want to thank former Commissioners Thomas and Corey for their input on that very long meeting you had in April, because you really went through all the detail.
Yeah.
But I think it was Commissioner Thomas that brought up, I think, what I think is an important point, and that is when the equipment is no longer being used, that it be taken down.
Yeah.
Because that's what I recall from back in the late 70s.
Yes.
There were a lot of those solar panels that were, collecting the air, and they got, beaten up and ripped, and they were on the sides of houses. They were ugly. And so we, that somehow that's built in.
And it should also be connected to our property maintenance. When they're no longer in use, they need to come down, and because they start to become blighted aspects of a particular structure, whether that's business or residential. Yeah. Okay. Yes, Steve.
We are spend a lot of time concerned about water runoff and how much green space and ponding areas are for water. I'm concerned that large arrays that are not on a roof, which is already shielding the underlying ground, what the effect of that would be on the underlying ground and radiation absorption. I have no idea what that would mean.
Yeah.
Boy, that'll be a great thing for you all to dive into and let us know. That's why we need all of you to do some of that work. So do that. Yeah, that'll be great information for us to have. Anything else? Deb, Jenny, Heather, you have what you need?
Yes, thank you so much.
Okay.
Madam Mayor, thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you for your work. We really appreciate it. Okay, so make sure you get all of the, whatever the arrays would do to our soil.
Congratulations on your chairmanship, too.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Madam Mayor?
Thank you. Yes.
As we're switching PowerPoint presentations, the Rosemont site is 160 acres, south of County Road 42, north of County Road 46, east of Minnesota State Highway 52, and it's
It's in Umore?
It's a 25-year IUP. The applicant was Geronimo Energy, which seems to suggest that it's not at Umore. They don't mention it in any of the articles.
Oh.
Is it
But-
connected to that big windmill that's over there, too? Right about
Didn't say anything.
In the same
Yeah, so I'm
area,
not
there's
sure.
a large.
Geronimo Energy was the applicant, and I know they've got other alternative sources, so that might be it. But that's
Yeah.
kind of where
Yeah.
that was, and it was a 25-year interim use permit that was approved by the city of Rosemont.
So, and it's on the south side of 42?
Yeah.
South of County Road 42,
You can see
north
it
of
from
County Road
52.
46,
Yeah.
east of State Highway 52.
Yeah, you can see
Yeah.
it from 52 as you're heading north.
And that's why I was wondering if it was Umore or part of, if they rented or leased that
They're
land
not,
from.
they're not mentioned, but.
Okay, because, Flint Hills keeps buying up a lot of that property. Okay,
And he's ready.
yeah. Thank you very much for doing that piece of research. Isn't that nice that you have the iPads right here and you can pick up all of that? Our next item is solar purchase program, and Garrett Beck, our Recreations and Facilities Manager, is presenting. Welcome, Garrett.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good evening, Mayor, council members. Tonight I'm here to talk to you about community solar gardens and what's going on in the state of Minnesota, and kind of just to provide an informational update on that. You can see what the ins and outcomes part is there. For this presentation, I'll give you a little background on solar gardens, talk about why is solar at the forefront of a lot of things being discussed right now, and why, if it is going to happen, a lot of people consider this to be a good time for it to be happening. And then if the city of Burnsville were to find it optimal to participate in solar energy, what are some of those options to try to make something like that happen? So basically, the way a community solar garden would work is that a developer would come into a community, acquire the land, and construct, design, maintain the solar garden essentially. That solar garden would be nearby an energy provider like Xcel Energy. It would go from the garden into Xcel Energy's resources, and then from the user end, it's basically received. You wouldn't know any difference on the user end side of things. Why it's kind of popular in Minnesota right now is we're one of just over a handful of states that have active legislation that has kind of made the market here in Minnesota attractive to community garden developers. In 2013, there was a law passed that established that market, and that allows consumers to essentially participate in solar energy without actually having to own and operate that on their own property. Because of this friendly market, we're seeing community solar garden developers come in. They'll basically handle the land acquisition, they'll do the design, the construction, the enrollment of the subscribers, and then they'll maintain it and own it over the course of the lifetime of the project.
Okay, so this is a private sector initiative.
Exactly. This is just a little grid here, as you can see kind of how solar energy production is starting to ramp up since 2008. Experts have long suggested that solar energy is the energy of the future. It's a renewable resource. It reduces pollution and whatnot. There's at least 33 shared energy projects taking place across 14 different states in our country right now. 4 of those projects are operated by cooperative electric associations here in Minnesota. And in the next 2 years, they anticipate that Minnesota will either be the leader in solar energy or in second place in solar energy. And currently that title belongs to Colorado and Arizona. So the big question, why is this coming before us right now, and why do we have people knocking on our doors about community solar gardens? Is basically because the federal tax credit of 30% is going to be reduced to 10%. The 30% tax credit is in place for any solar garden that is up and running prior to the end of 2016. And so the developers are able to pass on the savings that they get from the tax credit to their subscribers. So when that disappears, the savings and the financial savings that you'll receive as a subscriber will go down as that goes from 30% down to 10%. The other thing unique about Minnesota is that the state has mandated that Xcel Energy be involved in purchasing and using solar energy in our state. So they are providing a renewable tax credit as well. And again, once they meet their goal that the state has required, it's anticipated that that credit that they're offering will either be reduced or completely disappear altogether. And I just had a note up there that we receive about 50% of the energy that we use in Burnsville from Xcel Energy. So should the city find it optimal to participate in solar energy, there's a couple of different ways that you can go about that. As I heard most of you talk earlier, the idea of hosting a site here in Burnsville is not something that we're currently interested in. It involves having the appropriate land, which we probably don't do. You have to have zoning, the upfront investment, the ongoing maintenance that's related to being a host site is something that we're probably not set to be involved in right now for sure. So the other option that is currently available if you wanted to participate in solar energy in the future is to consider subscribing to a private solar community garden. So basically the way these community gardens look is, again, a developer will come in, they will acquire the land, they'll go about the whole process of building it, designing it. The actual subscribers to the community garden don't own a thing. Essentially what they own is the rights to the solar energy that is produced out of the panels that they've agreed to in a contract up front. The developer has the insurance, handles all the preventative maintenance, and takes care of the equipment and owns it throughout the entire life of the project. The way the programs would work if someone does subscribe to a community solar garden is essentially you determine the way the law currently is set up. You can subscribe to up to 120% of your anticipated energy use. The standard subscriptions that we're seeing from the developers out there is they're looking for about a 25-year agreement. Your rate is locked in at the time of the agreement, which again, energy is increasing at about an average of 4.5% per year. So you'd be able to lock in a rate that would last over the life of the 25 years. You don't have to do the full 120%. An organization could choose to do whatever amount they wanted. I know there's been some questions, and we've asked the questions, if you were a Solar Garden subscriber and your panels were not producing, what would happen in that case? And what happens in those situations, and obviously you get that ironed out in the contract and whatnot, but you're only billed from the developer for the amount of tax credits you receive from Xcel Energy. So in the event that there was a natural disaster of some sort or a failure in the system, it would be essentially like you were not a member of a community solar garden. You would continue to get your energy from Xcel and pay the same rate that you were paying as if you were not in an agreement with the developer. The developers at the same time do not make any money if their solar panels are not producing energy. So it's an incentive on their end to make sure that their solar panels are working properly. I've talked to a couple different developers, and they have an extensive preventative maintenance plan that takes place 4 times throughout the year. They're constantly monitoring the output to make sure that the panels are meeting the output that they're designed to meet on a regular basis. If an organization chose to subscribe to a community solar garden, there's 2 common ways that are going on right now. One is to issue an RFP and select your own vendor. Obviously, there's a lot of background work and time and whatnot that could go into going through that process. We have been contacted unsolicited by 2 different companies here at Burnsville. One was Sun Edison and one was SunShare. Both very similar in the types of numbers and things like that they provided us. The second option, if you did not want to select your own vendor, would be to consider participating in a community solar garden collaborative. Currently, here in the metro area, there was an opportunity last month for any local government agency to contact the Metropolitan Council and indicate that they were interested in being part of an RFP that was being done by the Metropolitan Council. And here's a little information on that. First of all, we did submit a letter of interest, which got us as one of the members of the 29 different government entities that were part of the Metropolitan Council RFP. There is no obligation on our end to participate in that agreement in any way. We have no financial obligations. And so it was really, it gave them an opportunity to go out to developers and say, this is the interest out there. It's kind of like purchasing things in bulk. The more people that were interested, the idea was they think they can get a better rate and attract higher quality developers and whatnot to in an RFP like that. Those proposals were due back to the Met Council on August 6th. I have been in touch with them. There's nothing available at this time. They need to review all the proposals, score them, and then ultimately make a decision. That was part of the deal, is that they will be in complete control of all the decision-making process and whatnot. So once they do go public with their results and we have more information on what that RFP, what the results of the RFP were, staff will be evaluating that RFP and then also looking at the options of whether we would want to do our own RFP with an individual vendor and then try to determine if solar energy is the right direction for Burnsville at this time.
Okay. Bill?
Well, just my initial, well, thank you for the presentation. My initial reaction is I can be, swayed otherwise, but would in general not be in favor of locking Burnsville into a 25-year agreement for on some potential energy thing. That just makes me incredibly uncomfortable. That's just my general reaction if they're looking for a 25-year commit.
Mary?
I agree with Bill, and particularly because the technology is changing so rapidly. Another thing that makes me somewhat concerned about this is the fact that these companies are coming in because they're going to get a 30% subsidy from the federal government that ends at midnight. You better order now. Do you know what I'm saying? It's like you got to do this now because this deal is going to be over. The problem with solar and wind energy, one of the big problems that I struggle with is not only the efficiency, the limited efficiencies of it, is the fact that it is so heavily subsidized by the federal government. When those subsidies go away, then what? I mean, and they will go away. This one's going to end in 2016. So I think economically, I don't think we're there yet. And I just don't think this is I don't think it's the technology that's going to really solve our problems.
Council members, just a couple of things on the solar energy that weren't in the report and whatnot. So some of the things, the two proposals indicated that we could save between $60,000 and $80,000 a year in our solar energy. It also, again, the reason why a lot of government entities are interested in this right now is that the history of energy is that the costs continue to rise. So there are options if you do an RFP with your own individual developer to enter into a sliding scale if you wanted to hedge your bet, or if you wanted to just lock yourself in at a rate that would increase as energy increased or possibly decreased. Those options are available as well. I don't believe it's part of the RFP that the Met Council is doing. I think they were moving forward with the idea that locking in a rate would be the best thing to do. So.
Okay. Mary?
I think what I would prefer to see is, as we do our facilities, we update, and Garrett, I know, this is your area of expertise, but as we're doing our new facilities, if we integrate some of the solar, both passive and active solar technologies that are when we get to this in another year or two, when we're doing the actual construction, we're going to have different stuff than is in there. I don't want to see us locked into old technology, and I think that's what this really would be. I mean, it's not that I'm opposed to building things in where we can save money and offset our costs, like we have down at the transit center. I mean, that was a good spot for that. There will be other spots for this in the future. I really believe that. But I just don't want to hook on to that wagon. This isn't, in my opinion.
The council wagon.
Yeah, exactly. Especially that. And I just don't think that solar is quite the holy grail that we think it is.
Councilmember Scherer, just one thing to address, and I appreciate that comment. The staff did discuss the idea that, whether or not we go with a community solar garden right now, if we did go that direction, that covers about 50% of our energy in the city, so there'd still be an opportunity to develop our own solar opportunities with our own facilities outside that market down the road as things became available. So, looking at one way or another doesn't mean you're locked in across the board, and it doesn't have to be all your energy options too. So there's a lot of different variables that are out there right now.
I'm open for us looking at new technology, whether that's solar or wind, or what are the other alternatives that are available, and leveraging that mitigates our cost and offsets it and reduce it. We've seen what moving to LED has done in terms of how it has reduced our cost. So any option that reduces our costs, I think, is something that we should explore. But I do think we should have some ordinances in place around the developers who come in. I don't want to be caught flat-footed when a developer comes in and wants to put in a community garden, and this is a business for them, and they're going to be going out and getting subscribers. Not necessarily that we're going to be a subscriber, but they're going to be subscribing users for this energy. I would like for us to make sure that we have something in place that addresses all of that. I'm open to seeing what are the opportunities for us. Maybe not necessarily the Met Council's RFP, but there's, you put out a couple of different things with the private sector, or a public-private, but it's only for our facilities, but not where we host or do any of those kinds of things. You have your hand up.
I just, again, want to make it clear, I would not do a 25-year commit on even on a cost averaging with Excel or something. I can't even, again, 5-year sure thing probably doesn't exist. I'm just saying, I don't, that's beyond what my comfort level, and I just wouldn't.
And I don't know if staff is saying that this is what you have that's out there now, but yeah, you're just giving us information.
Yeah, it's an informational. One of the reasons why they're looking at 25-year commitments is the developers, it'll take anywhere from 8 to 14 years for them to recoup their costs. So
I gather the problem is that they have the risk, but the risk is then passed to the subscriber.
Yeah, but I think we can also take a look at how that agreement is put in place too. Yeah, Mary?
Well, I wish I'd cut it out and brought it for this, but I think last week there was an article in the Wall Street Journal about one of these deals, and in fact, I went online to see if they had businesses in Minnesota that did the same, and yes, they do. And that was where people had actually, this is more of a private investment where they'd come in and do your house. And then you get the government, the federal government subsidy, or you'd share in that. But you'd lease these panels from somebody who came in and did this for you. Surprise, surprise, this is in Arizona. The homeowners wound up paying more than what they were paying for their regular electricity bill.
Yeah. And I'd much rather take a look at after 2016 when there isn't a tax credit, and then what is the real number.
They're in such a hurry.
Well, because those developers will get that tax credit.
I know.
That 30%.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. Suzanne?
Well, I agree with you, Madam Mayor, that, and at this point, it's mainly informational. I'd like to see what's available, what's out there. Same thing with Bill. I wouldn't want to see a 25-year commitment to something, but I think that there are probably opportunities, and we should continue to explore those.
Dan?
Well, first and foremost, I don't want to support any mission creep, any further mission creep by the Metropolitan Council, so I
You
don't
all
want to go there.
should know the word Met Council is not very well.
But I think this is a much bigger, this isn't a decision necessarily that we're making tonight.
No,
From a concept. It's great information. It's one option. I'm interested in lowering the cost
of
that
energy.
the city has of energy. So I think it takes a lot of research and a lot of investment and time to find out how do we do that and what's the best way to go about doing that. There's a lot of options with solar on specific buildings and lights and that kind of stuff. But this doesn't look like a very doesn't look all that great on the outside from this perspective. But I think we just, well, like I said, this is just an informational, this is something that's going on. There's some urgency there because of those credits, and I want to learn more, I want to know more, but I'm not interested in supporting the Met Council's deal.
Okay. I'm going to go to Deb and then to Heather, but I think what staff is asking us, because it's just information, because they're working on these things, and I want to tell you guys that I really appreciate that you're always looking at how we reduce cost and save the taxpayers money. And this is one of those opportunities, and I like that. But you all know that we're saying 25 years. It's a hard nut to crack when that technology continues to change. And maybe after December 2016 and everybody gets to a level playing field and no tax credit, and then we'll really know what that cost is. Yeah, but appreciate everything. Deb.
If I could, Mayor, council members, I think part of the reason that the Metropolitan Council is going forward and trying to do this type of consortium is to be the guinea pig for this type of application in Minnesota, because other
they'll carry
communities
the risk.
are leery. One of the things I wanted to make sure council knew is that there is also opportunity for, if the city wanted to participate in something like this, we do not need to be the host of the community garden. We could actually participate in a program, and the community garden is located in Eagan or.
Yeah, no, we understand that we would just be a subscriber of some kind, but yeah, but it's great information. So give us more.
Yeah. But when you say give us more, I guess what I'd like to see is give us more in the sense of what we can do on our own, in terms of our new facilities, or if there's a route.
Oh, yeah, but
let's do that.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we could probably do better than being part of this and
being part of a consortium.
Yeah, and then also, with these gardens, I looked at that one, you showed a picture from somewhere, and I thought, is this the highest and best use of the land? Especially in this area where we have such tillable, valuable land. Is that the highest and best use?
And that's why I want to make sure we have good land use and good ordinance in place. So if a developer comes in, I don't know what is the return on that property. Heather.
Madam Mayor, I know we're going to turn to the next discussion, but I think one of the reasons that a lot of councils are talking about this right now, and they're talking about the different pieces of how solar is being discussed, and some are entering into these agreements, some aren't. One of the reasons we looked at, we're not, again, this is just informational item, so that as you talk to your colleagues from other cities, that you have an understanding of what's going on in the market. The other piece is in the Met Council, when they have multiple jurisdictions, there is an economies of scale, and so we're not going to. So I think what we're looking at is to try to figure out how much of a savings that would be. Is there a savings dollar amount where it might be worth considering?
And that's what I'm looking
and figuring out where the
There's a federal subsidy.
But
afterwards,
the question is
well,
you're absolutely right.
And it says here, Garrett says in the background, Excel may reduce the incentive. And so, in other words, there are all these caveats here.
Which is why you walk in, or you enter into a contract that locks in rates. I think that's part of it.
But if they go belly up?
Then we're back to where we would have been before.
Yeah. If the contracts and whatnot are written in such a way that if they default, then you're out of it. And you don't own anything, you didn't invest anything, there's no obligation. Yep.
Yeah, and I think we have good, we're not harmed.
Our lawyer here.
Again, the reason personally that I'm not attracted to anything in the Met Council is that they're not an accountable entity. They can spend billions of dollars, overrun on rails, anything they want, and there's no accountability. They're not going to give us a contract that says, well, we'll give you a 15% under cost to market. I mean, they can't underwrite something, so therefore we ultimately, whoever will subscribe with them will share the risk, but we elected officials are accountable. They're not really accountable. They haven't been accountable for many of the things that they've done, are doing. We've complained about many things that they've done to them, and they didn't change much. So again, that's my reaction. I could care less if it's in Maple Grove or where it is. Again, that's not an attractive, any kind of more than a 5-year run or something. Well, that's, we're going to have to, logic tells me we're going to have to share the risk.
Well, so that staff is clear about, they're working on this. Council, are you in support for them to continue to do this work in this space so that we can also get some of the benefits of offsetting with all of this new technology?
If I may,
Yes.
I don't think the benefits are worth the risk.
So what you're saying, you don't want staff to spend any more time in this
I'd rather have
space?
staff spend time on what we can do individually with our own facilities.
Okay, you don't want staff to be having being a part of a collaborative. You would much rather that they spent their time looking at this with offsetting our own costs,
Our own facilities.
so that we could work with a private developer if they're going to, so that they own it and, but no, we own it and we do the maintenance and all of that?
Yeah, because what I'm reading in the financial press is that these are often shaky deals because so many of them depend on the federal subsidy. And when that goes away.
And I'm looking beyond the federal subsidy.
I agree, but I think anything that's subsidized.
Yeah.
Can always go, you can pull that rug, that rug can be pulled out from under it.
I understand.
Yeah, and I just don't want to put our taxpayers in that situation.
No. Yeah, Bill.
And along that lines, I think the same way. We'll evaluate the cost-benefit analysis. If they say 6 solar panels on top of the law enforcement center is a good benefit, a good risk or something at a certain cost, then we'll evaluate that. But again, I certainly can't imagine that I want to hire a private that somehow be a public-private, that they'll come in and they'll make this incredible deal and put it on top of the law enforcement center, and that somehow we come out ahead, and then if it becomes I don't know. So I'm more along the lines of Mary, that I'd want to judge it from our own perspective and own use, not some,
Okay. Okay. Dan?
Do you have something to comment before you?
Heather?
Madam Mayor,
Just trying to, so that you either understand whether you.
council members, well, I guess I'm hearing a couple of things. I mean, let me just first say is that we will look at alternative energy stuff for our own facilities. I mean, we certainly will look at whether we can, we have certain things, certain other facilities where we've looked at that, and we've put some, panels up, I believe, as well.
I also see that Steve has some panels out there on some of those.
On the water.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we have
I've seen
panels.
some of your panels, Steve.
We have panels up already. I guess the question is, and I keep hearing our own use, and that's, I think, what's making me puzzled. Because, this is offsetting our own use. I mean, this is a cheaper form of energy for our own use. This isn't something, so that's, I'm not.
Maybe in the short term, but he's talked about a 25-year potential risk, and maybe you could say in 2 years we save X amount of dollars. But again, it's a highly complex, high-risk deal. If there's some.
And we, Madam Mayor, Councilmember Copeland, we're not going to bring you a high-risk.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that the reality is that what we would want to do is we would want to look at, the reason we're going forward on that we were looking at these particular options is to try and do an evaluation. And most of the time, they're going to take that subsidy and they're going to spread it over the cost of it. And so we're trying to figure out, is this something that is worth pursuing in the long term? I mean, obviously, that any sort of contract would come back before council. It's just, we're just trying to do the evaluation at this point.
Yeah. Suzanne?
Well, I think Heather brings up a good point, and just sitting here listening to the discussion, and this is kind of, I haven't been reading a lot of information other than what we've had regarding this. I don't think we have a lot of information yet. And of course, staff isn't going to bring to us, we still may decide it's not what we want to do, but they're going to bring us the best option that makes sense for the city. And if we can save, what did you say, 50% perhaps?
$60,000 to $80,000 a year.
I think it's worth looking into. So I just don't think we have enough information to say, no, we don't want to do this. At least I don't. I'd like to see more and see what the benefit would be and what that really would look like for us.
Yeah.
As I said earlier, I don't think we have enough of the facts yet. I
Yeah.
want to learn more.
Me
I
too.
think we're so early in this whole thing that I hear what our CEO is saying. This is something that we're bringing forth to save money, and we're just starting the process. We have a lot to learn. I think we made a very clear message that we don't want to partner with the Met Council, for instance, but there's a lot more to it than that. And I don't want to make a judgment based on reading articles in newspapers.
Yeah.
There's so much more to this industry that we need to learn before we make a
too.
decision. So I want to learn it before I make that decision.
Yeah, and for me, that's why I said I'd like to have more information. I'd like to understand anything that's going to help us offset our energy cost is moving in the right direction. And I've seen that we have done that. Our staff has done great work in looking at that. And also good work in terms of our legal documents. And it doesn't hold the citizens of this community harmed. And
Got to come through us anyway, so we have a long way to go.
We all, it ends in our lap when we see that. And so so I'm hearing three of us saying, continue to bring information for us to evaluate.
Yes, I think that, I guess the best way I can put better way I can express my interest in what staff can do, and that is, I would like to see staff look at solar energy the way they looked at LED lights. In other words, this is a technology we can integrate into our building and save money. We've done a wonderful job with that.
100% in support. That's part of this.
We have.
Yeah, that's part
That's
of
only
And
part
that's
of it.
where I would like to see the use of solar. We can integrate it in some of this stuff that Steve mentioned, and that's fine. I don't want to partner with anybody for any length of time. I think, and sorry, Dan, but my reading is based on people's experience. And I can get you that information if you're interested.
Happy to read it.
But I think that people are getting burned and sunburned, if you want to say it, right? They are getting burned because some of this stuff is too good to be true.
Oh, it's new, or it's fairly new. And
It's so new, and it's so I do not like this garden aspect. I think that doesn't, to me, make a lot of sense. So
I'm,
it really doesn't.
Dan?
I'm
I think the risk is too high.
sure. And I'm not there. Maybe I'll get there where you're at already, but you're already down the road on your decision. My interest is I want to save money
Yeah.
for the city.
And if
Oh,
we
yeah, I
can
think
collaborate and
Period,
spread
period,
the
period.
risk
I'll even
out.
hold my nose and partner with the Met Council if that's going to save us money.
Yeah.
But there's a lot to get
Have
through.
you ever
before
seen a
we-
partnership with the Met Council that saved us money?
But that's a long way down the road. That's
Yeah.
not a decision we're making
Yeah.
next month. This is just the beginning. Appreciate all the work that staff and
Yeah.
Garrett has done on this. And
So-
I think we have to keep an open mind
Yeah.
yet because we're not there.
Yeah.
We're not that far down the road.
So what I'm hearing then, so Heather, you and staff know that there are three of us who are open, that you continue to work on this area and make sure that we get more information as we go. And you all will give us more
Madam Mayor,
information.
yeah, we've heard that.
Yeah.
We've also heard concerns by many of you about the terms as well, which we
Yeah.
can continue to explore.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, and thank you for all of your work and your research.
It was interesting.
Yeah. So, thank you. Okay, the next one. Oh, we've all been looking at these streets. So, Steve Albrecht, our Public Works Director, is going to give us feedback on our payment condition index discussion. And And you're going to tell our citizens that each and every one of us went out with you to look at the streets.
All but one of you went out with me. One went it alone with a neighbor. So yes, Mayor and Council, tonight we're gonna kind of close a loop on a discussion that was started last year and was talked about at our all-day work session about the long-term condition of our pavements, our streets in the city of Burnsville, and get some direction or some input from you on how we should proceed long-term. And remember, when we're talking about this, we've talked about this in our long-term planning. This isn't something we're looking to do this year, next year. We're looking in that 5 to 20 year range is what we talked about, implementing something. So something that the council can plan for when we start, now that we have the tools to look at where we're going to be 10 years from now if we make certain decisions on the pavement side of things. So with that, tonight's presentation, I want to review the purpose for everybody so they know why we're doing this, because I think some people question, why would we have the council go out and look at streets? What's the purpose of that? What's the importance of that overall in what we do in the city of Burnsville? Look at some proposed street classifications just to clarify a couple of details, and then look at the results of these surveys that you completed out in the field. And then also look at a future scenario. If we continue with our funding, where will we be at? Is that adequate? Is it not? Based on your survey result, what kind of funding would be necessary to get to where the council's initial survey results came back? And then finally, a couple of questions that staff needs some input and direction from the council on. So first, just jumping to the purpose of our presentation, our ends and outcomes have two things that are really tied to the condition of our streets. One is that people feel the community roadway system is well maintained at a reasonable cost. That's always our goal, that we don't want to have a system that's higher than we need. We don't want to have a lower system we need. We want to have the system that's right for Burnsville. And that's part of this discussion too, is we don't care what the manufacturer says our pavement conditions should be. The city of Eagan has theirs at, Apple Valley has theirs at. We compare what we think is adequate in Burnsville to service the needs of our residents and businesses. And then also, we added this outcome about defining a community quality standard and really giving us a goal. And we'll talk about that through all of this too. I think we can do a better job of tracking our progress in our monitoring report to give the council some actual indicators as to whether we're making progress, we're not making progress towards goals. So first thing we want to discuss is establishing a minimum PCI goal. And we talked about that at your all-day work session. Really, let's not have an average for this city. Let's have a goal and look at what is our minimum service level we're providing to all residents in the city. It's okay if we're providing above that, but we don't want to be below that. Secondly is identifying if we do need additional funding, what are the options out there? Or is our goal too high? I mean, that may be part of it too. We may say, you know what, we need to maybe lower our goal a little bit because we're just not going to fund at that level. And then third, establish that process I was talking about monitoring. How do we reflect this in the annual monitoring report? Something that we haven't really reflected. We've talked about our streets, but we haven't gotten into tracking our progress in the long-term condition of our streets. The first thing I want to touch on is just how we're going to handle our streets, and we've somewhat refined it to two classifications, the first of which is local roads. We've got about 188 miles of local roads. These are going to be our streets that are not designated as state aid streets. And state aid streets are the high volume streets, and we'll talk about those in a second. These are our neighborhood streets for the most part, or our low volume commercial streets. We have a lot of commercial streets that are somewhat neighborhood streets too, where you have businesses on them, but there isn't a lot of traffic. Historically, the city of Burnsville has put our commercial, industrial, and collector roads in one classification, and then put our neighborhood streets in another, whether they're high volume or not. And now we're going to take more of an approach looking at how many people are using them. And the reason for that is the streets that are used more heavily deteriorate more quickly. The second classification are our city collector or our municipal state aid roadways. 20% of the city's overall roadways are classified as this. This is something through state statute. The city of Burnsville receives money annually from the state of Minnesota from the different tax mechanisms, motor vehicle sales tax and other mechanisms that give us funding both for maintenance and for the reconstruction of streets. 20% of our streets, or 42.5 miles roughly, are eligible for that funding. Those are designated for our highest volume streets, and our streets that need to carry the most traffic are typically our MSA streets. Below that, I included just a little bit of information about how you classify your MSA and why they're different. Obviously, they're the heavier traffic volume. We have streets in the city that are local streets that carry 16,000, 17,000 cars a day. That's a significant amount for a local street. We have neighborhood streets that carry 100 cars a day. They shouldn't obviously be in the same maintenance classification, and that's why we've broken those apart. And then also they connect our major points of interest. These are oftentimes relievers to the county road system. They're large roadways. We all know with the work on Nicollet what an impact that's had on the traveling public, and Burnsville Parkway too. Yeah. Those are two what we would call kind of local collector roads that take a lot of traffic pressure off the state and county roads. And then also they provide an integrated coordinated highway system. So those are kind of the things that make up that second level. So jumping to our survey results, looking at our local roads, there's two columns there. There's a blue and a red for each of our evaluators. And really, when we went out there, the council was looking at ride quality. Now, ride quality in a neighborhood situation is maybe not as critical because the speeds are not as high. But when you're in the 30 to 45 mile an hour range, ride quality makes a difference on your significant roadways. So that's one thing that was evaluated. The other part that was evaluated was the visual condition and the condition of the street. Looking at the cracking of the street, some of the peeling of seal coating, and some of the different things that make up a street. And really for the council to take a look at several different neighborhood streets and say, these streets are acceptable if I lived in this neighborhood. This is not an acceptable level of service for our neighbors. And I think one thing with most of you we were able to do is go back through some recent reconstruction projects, and anybody in the community, I would tell you, go drive through one of our neighborhoods that was done a year or two, and you would be surprised. Neighborhoods that were built in the early 60s look brand new. The houses it's an amazing transformation when the city invests in those streets and the residents invest money too. Yeah. It really is something that's worth going through. If you want to see what the value of a reconstruction program to a neighborhood is, go to one of the recently reconstructed neighborhoods, and you really see the pride of ownership of our Burnsville residents and our businesses and what they kind of do in partnership with that road reconstruction. And so if we look at this, looking at the council's evaluations and the PCI on the left, it appears that when we get below about a 35, that's not acceptable to the majority of the council. At that point, that appears to be kind of the break point where we say, you know what, this is a street that's in need of reconstruction. I don't feel good about this service level to our residents. And so that's something that pops out there, and that's where so for the purpose of this discussion, we used a 35 to say, based on the council's initial evaluation, that 35 appears to be about the break point of where we think condition of street is just not bearable at that point. Certainly they varied a little bit, but 35 seems to be, as I said, a majority opinion of when the streets change for our local roads.
Just a point of clarification, evaluator number 2 felt that for the local roads, the visual condition was pretty good, but the ride was low. Is that how I'm interpreting that?
No, what these are your unacceptable levels. So what they said is, in many cases, number 2 said that when a street started to appear less than a 60 in PCI, that wasn't acceptable to them. So this shows what wasn't acceptable. So in the case of evaluator 1, a 40 was kind of their point when both visual and quality were not sufficient, and so that's why what that represents. So it's so looking at that, that's where we come up with that majority opinion of what is the lowest where is acceptable. As I said, we've got opinions on both sides, but a majority of the council at a 35 is where it kind of trended.
Right.
If we jump to our collector streets, you'll see that obviously the council feels that those need to be a higher service level. Those are our streets that are the heaviest used, and so looking at those trend lines, you're really looking at something in the neighborhood of a 55 as a PCI for that. That's a pretty high PCI, and we'll talk a little bit about what our streets are now and what they will be. But so we can see that our expectation of those higher volume roadways is that they're going to be in better condition. They handle a lot more traffic, so that means we're going to have to spend more money on those roadways more frequently, and we do anyway, because those roadways, they degrade at a much higher rate than a neighborhood street. A street has, to explain it commonly, a street has so much life in the pavement, and every time a car or a truck goes over it, it takes away a little bit of the life. Well, if you have a collector street that has heavy vehicles and lots of cars, its life goes away much quicker than a neighborhood street, which is very lightly used. And so that's really why you see the collector streets, as we start talking about, they degrade much quicker because of that. So based on the council survey, using a 35 as the bottom for local roads and a 55 just for conversation, this is no decisions are being made, these aren't being set in stone, but as a starting point for this conversation, we use those numbers. So future scenario based on our current funding, using those numbers, just to give a little bit of perspective, Our local roads right now, not our minimum PCI, but our average PCI is a 55, and about 29% of our local roadways of that 187 miles is below the 35 that the council would like to be the minimum. So that's probably having not quite a third, but almost a third of your streets below your minimum is probably not where we want to be right now, at least with respect to our local roads. Collectors are at a higher level. We do work on those streets more often. We do more preventative maintenance. Those are currently at an average of a 65. They're actually up right now because that reflects the work we're doing this year. As part of that, the council's made a significant investment in collector roads over the last 2 years, including this year. About a quarter of our collector roads are below that threshold that the council talked about of 55. So keeping that in mind as we look at the future, current funding scenario. So this is based on the funding we have available right now and that we're planning for in our CIP, not just a 5-year CIP, but as you know, we actually have a CIP that runs out to 2040 for our streets. We're trying to be that far out so we can identify trends and issues ahead of time. And so looking at our local roads, really what we end up seeing is the council upped our funding with some of the restoration of the ITF. The local roads benefited the most from the ITF restoration because we spend the most money on those annually. The other nice thing about the local roads is we're able to combine that with assessments from residents to leverage our money even further, and so we're able to do a lot of bang for the buck on our local roads. They're also much cheaper to reconstruct than the collector streets, and so those things combined, we look at the PCI, our average PCI of a 55 is very stable over the next 15 years and actually begins to increase after the year 2030. And so that's good news. I think what that means is we're probably funding our local roads at the adequate level. Now, it's difficult to project what the percentage of streets that are going to be under a 35 in 2030 are, but what I would tell you is the stabilization of that, we believe that number will shrink from a 29% and get much closer to we don't ever think it would be 0% anyway. We always think that maybe a 10% of our streets below your minimum is probably a realistic number because streets tend to change by plus or minus 5 PCI points when they start to really go downhill. So there's no way the council's ever going to be able to fund every street that drops below 35, but we think maybe 10% is an acceptable level. Staff believes that your current funding probably will get you to that 10% at some point in the mid-2020s, and I think what we would propose is we'll track that. We wouldn't propose that we would put any more funding in the local roads right now, that we would maybe take advantages similar to what you did last year with the maintenance overlay. If there are some fund balance available and we have some of those 1980s, 1990s streets, take some one-time opportunities to get those back up if we start tracking off course, but not necessarily investing year after year additional dollars in local roads. Use that money strategically if we start to have an issue that pops up, because that is one of the things that's actually put your neighborhood local streets in much better shape. That $1.8 million you invested last year was critical. Yeah. I mean, every street you did 16 miles of streets that were below a 20. And that's a huge thing to take streets from below a 20 and put them up at 100 to start with, or you're a 90 after a year. So I think that shows that's a very good bang for your buck on the local roads, and that we probably don't need to do anything with the local roads. Jumping to our collector and MSA roads. The trend that we're seeing here is that our pavement condition drops to below a 50, our average pavement condition, by 2022. 2022 appears to be when we're kind of hitting the rock bottom of the age of our streets in Burnsville. We were constructed mainly in the late 60s through the 70s, and by 1980 the majority of our streets were constructed. 2020 is when we're still, or 2022, we're still kind of in the heat of, or that big bubble. We're in the middle of it. We start coming out of it after 2022. That seems to be where we bottom out in a lot of our infrastructure, because that's just how old our city is. But the trend that we saw, like I said, in the local roads, we have a little dip, but it's fairly stable through that because your funding is pretty adequate. What we're seeing in the MSA roadways is, while again they do increase back up to about a 62, they start to decline. And what's happening with those roadways is the level of funding that we have for those, it's similar to the issue that MnDOT is having. Over time, we're not increasing our inflationary rates enough to keep up with the cost. Those are expensive roadways to rebuild, and we just start doing less and less miles as we get out past 2032 based on inflation if we don't keep up with inflation. The other thing is those roadways, a big piece of those roadways is the money we receive from the state. We don't project that the state's money is going to go up much at all. It's going to stay fairly flat. It's not going to even increase for inflationary increases. And so those two things combined, we start doing just less and less MSA streets long-term if we don't do something additional money-wise.
Yeah, Mary?
To your discussion of inflation, when you're doing the CPI and you're looking ahead many years, do you build inflation into?
We do. We build, well, our funding program that we have set up in the city has about 1.5%, but we're seeing 3% is really a more realistic long-term. And so we're only funding at about half of what inflation appears that it's been tracking at. And so that's where it's going to eat up. Now, the local roads, it certainly eats away at those, but those roads are not as dependent on a flat, remember, half of the money coming into this isn't increasing at all, so that's not inflating. The state isn't inflating it, and only a piece of it's inflating at 1.5%. They're also our most expensive segments of roadways, so the cost per foot is really impacted by inflation versus a cost there. So,
But when you're projecting your costs.
yes, we're doing inflation. Yep, our costs are inflated. Everything's,
yep.
Yep.
Okay.
And then when we talk real today dollars, we bring that back into real day dollars too.
Got it.
So,
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Should you be looking at the 3?
well, and we'll talk about that.
Yeah,
That's one of the discussion topics that
Yeah.
we'll talk about. There's different ways to, again, this is a long-term thing we're looking at. This isn't a next year or the year
Right.
after.
Yeah.
This is something for you to think about
Yeah.
when we have opportunities.
Good.
So, what I would say leaving that is our local roads look good. I mean, right now, I don't think that we should be, there's no reason that we should be looking at a funding mechanism for that. Our MSA roadways, what would it take to get those to the council's goal level? So we took a look at just what it would take to kind of hit your goal at a 55. It looks like we would have to, at some point in year 5 on, be putting about $600,000 a year additional into the collector streets to keep them, to hit that 55 goal. That may be too lofty of a goal. That may be one of our discussion points. We may just want to back that goal off. And then the other thing is we probably would want to add another $54,000 a year to cover the real cost of inflation versus the 1.5%. And so those are two different factors that would get us to the 55. Not necessarily something we have to do. If we do that, we do see still the same bottom out in 2022 just because of the roadways deterioration. The other thing I should add too is this goes to how quickly those roads need to be rebuilt. A neighborhood street doesn't deteriorate as fast. That's why it's more expensive to maintain that collector street mileage than the local roads too. We redo a local road, we're looking at a 50 to 60 year cycle in Burnsville with preventative maintenance.
What's the, excuse me, if I may, what's the typical life of a collector or high volume road?
In Burnsville, we'd like to get 20 years before we have to resurface it. We're really seeing that it's more like 15 years or less before it really starts to fall apart.
Okay, but what about a rebuild? I mean, you
Rebuild, we still would like to get 60 years. So we would, in a 60-year life cycle, we would rehabilitate the road every 20 years and then year 60 reconstruct the road.
Okay, yeah.
So that's kind of, we look at a 20-20-20 cycle is what our goal is for our staff, and we believe if they're built right, not like the pavements of the 80s and 90s, we should be able to get that out of them with preventative maintenance. So if we look at this, our average PCI drops to a low in 2022, but it does stabilize well above a 70 by 2042 and doesn't drop. And that tells us that you've stabilized the issue completely, but you may be stabilizing at a higher level than is necessary. And so I think that's part of the long-term conversation too, is do we need to be at a 55 for our minimum, or can we live with a 50 or something lesser than that? So with that, the questions that we want to talk about, and again, this isn't a decision point for tonight necessarily, is should the city, moving forward, identify a minimum PCI as a basis for somewhat of our goals for funding our streets? If so, and then should we identify what the potential funding sources might be long-term for meeting those PCI goals? And again, we're talking in the 5 to 20-year window. We've never proposed anything in the lesser window at this time. And then the third question is, in the annual monitoring report, I do believe we should start tracking what percentage is below whatever that threshold the city council decides is appropriate, and then looking at our average. So you really do have some history about what your investments are doing and where we're trending. We just don't show that detail, and I think that's important detail to tell the story. So with that, I would answer any questions the council has and turn it back to you.
Okay. Questions?
Oh, great
Comment?
work. It was awesome.
Yeah.
This is a great project for us to get in contact with the people.
I like the fact that it gives us information that when we're looking long-term, we understand what decisions we need to make and how we make those funding sources available to make sure that we have the quality of streets for our residents and businesses. So I'm very happy with the process and the information that you're presenting this evening, and thank you very much, because it gives us better knowledge of what the PCI means in terms of what is that factor and what does it look like. Going out and looking at the streets give us that factor. Now I know visually what those numbers mean instead of just numbers. Mary?
Well, I second that. It was a very interesting exercise because I thought, what do you want us to drive on the streets for? But the way you set that up and you know, just you made it very simple. So to answer your first question, yeah, I think that I think you're on the right track with having a minimum PCI goal. I think that what I learned from that exercise is that even though it's subjective, it is measurable to a certain point.
It's objective when you look at the pavement.
Yeah, I know, but I mean, you could still, I mean, we had differing ideas of what was acceptable, but nonetheless, it was, you know, it was a real hands-on thing, and I think that what you're trying to do, and I think it's very commendable, is you're trying to do this having data so that you can make decisions based on that. And I really support that all through the whole thing. So, thank you.
Yeah, I agree as well, and I hope one of the discussions in the funding source, I'd like to see what the history of the 60-40 split has been for allocating cost and how that would apply if you had a 55-45 or something, because we're talking $650,000 a year plus inflation, and that's not a small number. So,
yeah, okay.
Big infrastructure.
Suzanne?
I say yes, yes, yes.
Okay.
But same, I mean, ouch. When you hear that number, it's,
Yeah.
but we just, again, number 2 will help us with that, looking at potential funding.
Dan?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're all good, and I like adding that to the monitoring report, so we can, now that we've got a system and a process in place, we can continue to be updated and watch the trend, and it'll be interesting to come up with what kind of funding mechanism. I mean,
and that'll be part of your, you know, we've got some fee conversations going on, and we'll try to be creative in what the options are, and I think that'll inform what level we can afford.
Sure.
And I think we have to be cognizant of that too. We need to build what we can afford, not necessarily what we want.
Sure.
And so,
But what's interesting is how we all think alike.
except for number 5, whoever that was.
Well, number two. That's only on one area. Go
Yeah.
back to.
Number
It was
5
only on
was
the-
consistently below. I don't know, does that mean number 5, whoever that is, had a lower threshold for what was considered bad?
yes,
does that mean?
I don't know what those results were, so I
So that was.
I don't think answering those questions is
Yeah,
good for my
but
career.
what, the thing is, the average, when you look at the average, it came up, because it was always like 40 and then some below, but it was always that average that we all came.
Yeah.
Yes, Suzanne?
Oh, and here's the caveat, when you went out with Steve, he brought his Jeep, so it's a little bumpier.
Yes, I didn't hide. I didn't take you on anything that was going to hide any of
I
the.
kept riding bumpy.
So 4 of us rode with Steve, and number 5 didn't? They had a Cadillac and everything.
Again, I'm not going to get into
This isn't bad at all.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Steve. That was very well done. Okay, our next item on the agenda is the Orange Line update.
Mayor, members of the council, Jenny and I are going to tag team this tonight. Before I start, I want to preface this by saying this is informational for our council. We are not, there is no formal vote from the city of Burnsville on this. We're not a funding partner. Metro Transit and Dakota County are still having lots of conversations about what's going on here. I know we have Commissioner Workman right here, and so they have not come up with what they believe is the right thing for Dakota County yet, and they haven't had those conversations yet. So it would be premature for us to be supporting any option based on Dakota County still has to have a lot of conversation about this. So I want to preface it. Unfortunately, the cycles of work sessions and things, we do want to get your just get some concepts out to you so you see them, get any reaction from you on them, so that if something does move forward, we can at least express your opinions on what you saw. And so with that, the first thing we wanted to do, and I'll correct, I haven't had a chance to correct this. This is really the 66th Street interchange or Orange Line, and what we're going to do is give you a little history on some of the Orange Line stations north of us in Bloomington and Richfield, so that you can get some perspective about what's being done along the Orange Line in other cities before we have our conversation about what the options are here. So jumping up to 66th Street, what you see is two locations that are actually on the on and off ramps, which are diamond on and off ramps on 35. And so these really are your kind of offline, but very close to 35W type stations. And so in those cases, you've got the ramps where you're coming up northbound, and then you're going back southbound. And so you've got those ramps on 66. We wanted to show you this. This is the Knox Boulevard alternatives. They looked at two alternatives, one in green, which is very much of an offline where they have two stations along Knox, and then they get off of 35, and then they circle through and come back. They make a couple of stops and then come back onto 35. And then they also looked at the blue, which was very much an inline or immediately offline type station concept. And the support for this project was actually to be the offline Knox Avenue concept. So as we talk through the Orange Line, it is a different animal than the Red Line, because there have been decisions made already that are going to make it different. It's not going to be the same kind of a bus rapid transit that maybe the Red Line is. And so just to be aware of that as we're talking through our potential station locations, there have been both kinds of stations considered north of us, and they're moving forward on the design of both kinds of stations. And then moving to 98th Street, you're back on very much of something that's kind of an online, inline. There's a lot of different ways to describe it. You've got one on as they're headed southbound, you've got one on the off-ramp on southbound, and then northbound there's a station on the off-ramp too. So again, two stations, but on the ramps basically. So very much using existing park and ride lots, which I believe on 98th, I believe that's a park and ride lot immediately to the east of the northbound station. So again, you're seeing a mix of different types of stations in the Orange Line to the north of us in Bloomington and Richfield. So, jumping to our site locations, we're going to take you through those. We initially showed you two site locations that were under consideration. Two more were added for consideration since we met with the council last, and we'll take you through those. The first of which is the Burnsville Transit Center site, and that's not a new one, obviously. We talked about that. For various reasons, the TAC committee for the Burnsville terminus did not recommend proceeding with this site. Many of those reasons were tied to the impacts on the MVTA site. The small investment that's being made on this site doesn't really help cure any of the issues that are going to be on the MVTA site. MVTA is expanding service right now. They're expanding bus traffic to this location. They plan on utilizing the parking that's would be eaten up by this. And so for various reasons, and also it's somewhat disconnected from the heart of the city, which I would tell you Metro Transit has spent a lot of time contemplating the heart of the city and how to get more people to the heart of the city. I think that's something that they really are focused on. And Jenny will talk about that a little bit. Then the second site, obviously, was our Travelers Trail site, which is on the existing park and ride lot across from the AAA property. You've seen that before. The TAC committee recommended that if an option was going to occur in Burnsville, at that time, this would be the option that would be considered. However, there were two other options that were evaluated too, and we'll touch on those. The first alternative option is this is Burnsville Parkway Bridge. On Travelers Trail, they looked at building. Well, it's not an inline or online station. It's a station that's immediately adjacent to the 35W right-of-way. That you would southbound traffic would come up through the loop, come up through the station, and then they go straight back down, and they could head to Lakeville that way, or they could go back up through Travelers Trail and head northbound, or head northbound on the loop or southbound. So they've got a couple of options there at that location. This was a site that MnDOT and many others thought may warrant some further discussion. And then also they looked at what we would call kind of an online ramp one that would be on the issue with the intersection at Burnsville Parkway and 35 is it's not a full diamond. And so the directions that you want to go with our traffic without building two stations don't lend themselves for this being, it lends itself to be maybe a terminus, but never a permanent or a inline site in the future when we go to Lakeville, so there's issues there. There's also issues about how you turn the buses around. There's also concerns about pedestrian traffic in this location. You'd end up with pedestrians crossing several lanes of ramps. There's no parking immediate to it. In a terminus situation, we're probably going to have people that want parking. And so this, for many safety reasons, this was not considered a viable option. And so kind of jumping back, this option was kind of a close second to the first option on Travelers Trail. Where we're at now is there is conversations going on about which of the heart of the city and Travelers Trail options is best for the overall project. Is it a combination of the sites? Is it one site over the other? And so that's the conversations that are going on right now. I know Metro Transit and Dakota County staff, as I indicated, are having conversations about making a presentation to the Dakota County Board and the Railroad Authority to make sure they get their input, because it's obviously critical. They are a major funding partner of this project, and so Dakota County needs to be satisfied that this project makes sense, both short-term and long-term, and then also look at when the long-term is going to happen, because Lakeville connection is a critical thing for Dakota County as far as they're concerned. So, again, these are the sites that are on the table. So we did want to, as we talk this through, get any council input on either of these two sites along Travelers Trail. If you have issues or concerns with them, we make sure we're able to express those as this moves forward and we discuss it further. The other issue that we wanted to touch on is we had some conversation about TODs and the impact of having an investment like this in our heart of the city. Does that have implications to the city? And so with that, I'll turn it over to Jenny.
Thanks, Steve. I just want to share some high-level TOD information. This information all comes from the Met Council's Transportation Policy Plan, which was adopted earlier this year. So they specifically call out what is required for the BRT lines. They qualify a TOD as within a 10-minute walk or half-mile area of the station. We will have to provide station plans in our next comprehensive plan update, and I should preface this, all this can be rolled into our comp plan update where we're at with that. So, but there will be some significant impacts on what does go into that plan. For their TOD areas, they require a minimum density of 10 units an acre, so they're looking to get that higher density area closest to the station to get people to the station to maximize that and to not only access but amenities at each station. They're also looking for, I'll call it a 7,000 person activity level, whether it be residence, entertainment, employment, retail, commercial activities within that same half-mile radius. So they really want to create a little hub, as I'll call it. And then, of course, incorporate design elements and land use for connectivity. Very similar, I would say, to the Heart of the City Framework Manual. In fact, I think that's one of the reasons they look so fondly on Heart of the City is it does fit those criteria that were already in place before the whole TOD trend started. Heart of the City started 17 years ago. So what I've done is just put together kind of a scenario. What does this mean for us with our zoning and our comp plan at either of these two scenarios? At the Travelers Trail Station, we would have to increase the density in the HOC ordinance. Our ordinance for HOC calls for a minimum density of 8 units an acre. So we would have to increase that. What has been built there, I would say, is an average of about 20 units an acre. When you take all the sites that are there, we far exceed that. So our single family is 4 units an acre. Our townhouse developments are about 6 to 8 units, and our multifamily that we have around town is much higher than that. So I don't see that being an issue. Within this half-mile area, then we have about 4,200 residents, and when you factor in the jobs, the Ames Center, all the commercial activities, I believe we would be well over the 7,000 activity hub. As far as the zoning goes, the area north of Highway 13 would need to be rezoned at Zone B3, and the TPP calls for uses that are discouraged in that. They really want to get away from auto-centric uses and get more to pedestrian-oriented uses. Of course, we have some of those auto uses on the north side of 13. When you look at a Burnsville Parkway TOD area, same thing, we'd have to increase the density in the HOC ordinance. The eastern half of that circle there is all in HOC. We have a little bit fewer residents, but we do have a significant number. There are other apartments and a large number of single family that were built at a little higher density in that area. And when you factor in the jobs and the commercial activity, I think we're going to be just about 7,000. We might be a little bit under, we might be a little bit over, but it is not as intense as the Travelers Trail site. And similar to the B3 zoning that's north of Highway 13 at the Travelers Trail site, We have areas west of 35 that are zoned B3 that would have to be looked at to be changed. And similar auto-centric uses that would have to be grandfathered in. The TPP plan also lays out some best practices for land use. These are things, again, very familiar with our heart of the city. Pedestrian-friendly, mixed use, create and preserve affordable housing, incorporate civic public uses, protection of natural resources, and then addressing financial barriers to private investment. These are overall riding kind of policies that are in their plan. Here's just an example that they do have that gets to what the land use plan would look like. So you'll see the corridor running through on this graphic detail with land uses that would change. Not every land use has to change. It is what we feel is appropriate. So we would identify parcels that could be redeveloped, and if they would be, what would it include? It would include things like multifamily, that includes an affordable housing mix, office, hotel, cultural, education, commercial types uses. Things that would discourage surface parking, but they do encourage park and ride lots. Warehousing, indoor-outdoor storage, car sales, auto repair, again, are discouraged.
Mary, aside,
yeah.
thank you. I see the multifamily affordability. I mean, and especially I'm looking at that area on Burnsville Parkway because that circle that you showed would include apartment buildings that are definitely affordable. So would we meet the Met Council's criteria for affordable? We wouldn't have to add more affordable housing, is what I'm saying?
Yeah, Councilmember Sherry, members of the council, I don't know. I wish I had an answer to that question. This is all very new. It's a new plan. It's TOD designation with this Orange Line station is new to us. We've made some inquiries to the Met Council last week and this week, and we have not heard back. So I have a long list of questions to ask them, and that is one of them. I would like to think we would get credit for what is existing.
I would hope so.
And Mary and everyone, I sit on LUAC, and I continue to push that they should recognize what we already have existence, and I know Jenny also speaks to that.
Yeah.
Instead of saying you have to add more, we're
That's the
saying, no,
point.
you have
You're
to
right.
acknowledge what we already have. And
Right.
so,
And just a couple more slides. So after the Orange Line is designated and the funding is committed, there are some things that the city's going to have to do. We're going to have to adopt those station area plans, which I said could be part of our comprehensive plan. We'll have to deal with the density levels for any new development or sites that we identify for redevelopment. We'll have to implement plans and policies that preserve and increase affordable housing within the overall mix. This is a question area that I don't have the answer to exactly what that word implement means. And then target property acquisition, rehab, and development funding that provides for the mix of housing affordability as well. So these are all things that will be expected of us to be consistent with the Met Council's plans. So our thoughts and comments on this is having a stop in heart of the city certainly is a benefit, as an amenity to the area. Like Steve said, there's a lot of different stops along the Orange Line. This seems to be replicating what's happened on 66th Street in Knox, where it's getting access to where the residents are, where the activities happen. The decided locations, it's our understanding after our last meeting, they're not temporary. We shouldn't consider them to be temporary. Once they're there, the likelihood of them going away is unlikely, I guess. So we should just work off of that understanding. Heart of the City is the type of TOD that the Met Council is looking to expand or replicate at their other station areas. We will have to update our ordinances and comp plans to be consistent with the TPP. If they are not consistent, the Met Council will reject our comprehensive plan. By law, our comp plan has to be consistent with the Met Council's plan. And there's many questions about this consistency and expectations that will have to be worked out. We're very early on in the process, but I did want you to know what's on the table and what's expected of us. So.
okay, interesting. Yeah, good information, and just, you have questions for staff on any of this, and just know that I continue to push the Met Council to recognize what we already have in place. And I know Jenny does the same thing in the committees that she sits on at the Met Council, so. Any other comments? I think.
It's good. That's both presentations really kind of brought it into focus for me. That I'm not on transportation with MVTA, and so to see these options and the benefits and drawbacks with each one of them. One thing I noted, the area around the Travelers Trail in the heart of the city, that one, the north side of 13 is sort of in that ring, and we can play around with the zoning ordinance all we want, but nothing's going to move there for decades.
Yeah.
So, and plus, it would need a pedestrian bridge to make it even desirable to walk over that way. So it's really more the southern half of 13. That whole area, clearly where the heart of the city resides, is where all the walking and et cetera. Is that going to be a problem then?
No, I would note that the TAC has moved off of a bridge over 13. They don't believe that what they're focusing on is remembering that we've got express service from MBTA right at our ramp, is now having this Orange Line bus circulate to those stops. So if someone wants to take the Orange Line home late at night, they would park at one of our downtown locations, jump on MBTA, where they normally would catch the express at the ramp, and then at the end of the day, BRT could bring them back at that location without them. So they'd be able to interchangeably. So instead of focusing on a bridge and having people walking, if we're going to have the Orange Line bus circulate in our downtown, use Travelers Trail, whether it's one site or two stops, maybe it has multiple stops so that it's accommodating that need rather than trying to have people walk across 13. And so they acknowledge that it isn't just 13, it's Nicollet. To get from this side to the east side of Nicollet is another bridge. So now we're talking $3-4 million worth of bridges. That's just not feasible, I think.
Jenny?
Madam Mayor, and to add to that, at either of these stops, the MVTA will accommodate folks. So if someone works north of 13, right, they may not walk across Highway 13 to get here, to get back to, South Minneapolis or Richfield if that's where they live. They could, depending on where it is, MVTA will have a route that would take them from this station across Highway 13, and then they could walk to their employment at a more continuous offering than is now, every 10 or 15 minutes. So while you may not walk it, you may have transit that's available to get you across.
MBTA staff has been on record to say that they will look at enhancing. To them, they believe that's the right way to do it, enhance their service level to connect the two rather than having it at their bus station.
One of the things that I appreciate about the presentation this evening is, Steve, you talked about the orange line being different from the red line and seeing some of the different offline areas up and down 35, because we have said, and it's in our, that we want an online station. And I think they've looked at all of this and they're saying there's no way that you're going to have online stations coming down on 35W, even in Minneapolis and in Bloomington and Richfield, they're going offline like they're doing in Burnsville. So that's new information for me. And the comment that this is not temporary, so stop thinking about it as temporary. So it's like, okay, I'm going to have to think a little bit more about the heart of the city and this one as what the alternative is going to be. Rather, I like the Travelers Trail that's closest to 35, but that doesn't, that one.
But we don't have, I brought it in here, go ahead.
Yeah, but I mean, that's an option. And that's a right-of-way that belongs to MnDOT. So, okay, Bill?
Well, and to me, if they say no, that you're not going to consider what's there already as part of affordable multifamily housing, to me, then it's simple, it's over. I mean, it's not like we magically, out of those two locations, can change what we have, and I for one am not going to take the AAA site and then say, okay, then let's build a 30-story apartment building, affordable housing to accommodate that. So to me, hopefully they'll come up with the answers very quickly, and they've already really thought that through, and these are just sort of generic stuff, because it's it is what it is.
Yeah, and as Jenny said, we already meet that with the heart of the city.
Right, but I mean, so it should be a quick conversation. If they say they don't know or no, it should be a quick yes, and if it's not, then, why waste they're just wasting our time.
Yeah. I'd like to know more about the Travelers Trail, but Mary?
Well, we aren't going to
No.
be able to have any
no.
input anyway, are we?
No, I just
but
wanted to
they're
find out.
interested in our feedback. I would
Yeah.
tell you, Metro Transit's been genuinely interested in. I mean, they wouldn't even bring us to the table if it didn't matter. But I think
Okay.
they're interested in developing a partnership with the county and with MBTA and with the city that works down there. And that I think that's I would believe that they were honest in that sales pitch to us that
Yeah.
they want to be in the heart of they want to do business in the heart of the city.
Yeah.
I mean, they were fortunate enough 2 weeks ago to be down there on a hot day and to see the life and activity around Nicollet Commons Park and all the things down there. Their staff actually got excited, I think, about the potential
So
of that.
HOC 1 they like, HOC 2, which is where this is in HOC.
But they like the other part of the city that touches too. It provides it to people that may need that type of
Yeah.
access too. So they liked both areas, and actually I think they were a little shocked. They didn't know that some of the rental numbers that we have in that area in the loan. Their numbers need to be updated a little bit. So I'm going to work with
Yeah,
them on
because
that.
you have Raven Hills and all of that when you get to HO, and then you have Pine, is it Pine, still Pinecrest, Pine? That's right by the Holiday Station?
Yes.
That's a huge complex. The Pines.
Yeah.
300 years.
That's a huge, and then you have on Heritage, you have those two big apartment buildings.
So are we to give an opinion tonight?
We just want your feedback. I think
Yeah.
we've taken feedback from council member. We would pass along any feedback,
Yeah.
and they want to know any feedback we have tonight and concerns.
I guess, if I may, I see advantages to each site. One advantage I see to this site is that it does reach into the apartments, Raven Hill and then Pines across the way. That does provide bus service to the people who live there. Plus,
And they
there
can
are
walk.
quite a few businesses along that Travelers
Yeah.
Trail Road, lots of them.
Yeah,
The advantage I see to the other one in the HOC, or closer to the HOC, is that I do believe that if there were a transit station there, that would help juice interest in the old AAA property in terms of development, but not for apartments.
no. No.
So I don't know. I mean, honestly, I just.
Remember, we have these goals too that they're very aware of, and it's
Yeah, well,
70-30,
they
and
are
we're way
aware of
below.
them. Are they really aware of them? Like,
Oh, we tell, I keep mentioning them.
I know you
to
do.
Jenny.
I know you do, and you're after them, but I'm
seem to
glad you
forget.
are. But they seem to forget, or it goes in one ear and out the other. I guess so. I just feel they're trade-offs, and I don't know what the answer is.
Yeah.
And that's okay to
Yeah.
feel that both sides have positives because they may look at a combination. There's a lot of things on the table. So
Yeah. Suzanne?
Yeah, I feel the same way. I think there's advantages to both sites. I kind of lean towards this one a little more because I do think that maybe there would be some advantages to that area with having that there. But
Yeah.
They're not that expensive. Why don't they do both?
The conservative guy.
Let them spend money.
More
it
money.
is money, no.
Yeah. Okay. Bill, which one do you like best? I like, both of them have benefits.
They both do. I'd actually go with the other one. If
Yeah.
it's just an edge.
Yeah. They're both very good, so, we'll like both of
see where
them.
this goes. Okay, thank you. That's what we needed, council.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. We don't have any more items except reports. Nothing in roundtable, so Dan, do you have anything?
Well, the fire muster's coming up pretty soon.
Yeah.
Pretty excited about that. They have a meeting this Thursday night. And the Community Foundation had a meeting today, which I couldn't attend, but I did get an email update on fundraising for the new sculpture, the water feature It's
Going
going
well.
exceptionally well. Yeah, there's
Because
some
I've
people
been
who-
involved in some of it, and
Yeah.
we have, I
It's-
think we've done it.
Yeah.
We've done it.
That's probably, overshot the goal. Mary Jo has done
Yeah.
an incredible job.
She
and
has.
There's been some very large donors to see that project get done, so it's going to be great. That's it.
Nice.
Suzanne?
Let's see. The Ames Commission is currently working on their business plan and, of course, the budget, as we are. They will be meeting again in September. And I was unable to make the LMC meeting for service delivery policy, but Steve Albrecht went and said that it was pretty quiet. Let's see, it's still talking about the massage therapy regulations. Let's see. Yeah, nothing too much at this last one.
Okay. Mary?
Metro Cities, Transportation and General Government, I've really been pushing hard on that for the group homes issue, and there are some, I think I reported last month that there are people, other communities that are experiencing the same problem. But somehow it's getting derailed. Steve's not here, but that somebody wanted to talk about best practices, so we're going to have, and then I so what are we talking about here? Best practices, and I think they're talking about, community policing and all of this stuff, and I'm thinking, wait a minute, all we want is no concentration.
Yeah.
So I don't know how that got off track, but I pushed really hard to get it back on track. LMC Policy Committee, Improving Local Economies, that meeting's coming up on Tuesday, and they get that. They get it, don't they, Jenny? Yep. They really get it. So, and I just was shocked that Metro Cities, I'll have to talk to some of the other members there, because they were even more, some of them were more vocal than I was, if you can imagine that. And so I'd like to see those two bodies get together and let's get some action on that thing. So that's all I have. Everything else is 35 Solutions. You heard more than I know tonight. So
Okay, Bill?
meeting on Tuesday or Thursday.
I'll defer to Heather and Dana if they think anything was of importance.
The revenues committee, it's pretty standard, I think.
I
I think
know it-
we have another one coming up next week.
To be
so we'll
quite
probably
honest,
order
it dragged
for that.
on, so.
Yeah. Okay. Dana and I are on the Met Council, with Metro Cities, we're on the policy review of the Met Council.
Oh, boy.
So,
That's got to be fun.
last time we were there, we were reviewing all of the legislative agenda items and going through all of that. There was nothing that you all don't know about. And so tomorrow, she's going to cover that, because I have to go to the Workforce Investment Opportunity Act implementation, because I chair that for the state of Minnesota. So I'll be going to that. The other one that I think is of interest to all of you is our CVB, and we had our retreat, and one of the things that we came away with is really focusing our concentration on how to drive traffic to our community. And so we looked at some of the things that we were involved in and opted out. So the garden and landscaping and winter lighting after the 21st, after this year, we will not be doing that. We'll be focusing all of that. We're doing a lot of work with the Minnesota Travelers for Burnsville, and that's going to be airing on Channel 9 in September. And so focusing on videography and photography about what's really great, why should people visit us. And then some of the other events in the city that the CVB was participating in. We looked at the number of hours that our staff is putting into that and said, that might not be the best use of time, but concentrate on driving traffic to our city. So, Jenny, is there anything else on that?
Just to add on the driving traffic, looking at some changes, some improvements to the measurables and the metrics, like with the website. How do we know who's going where to help make decisions that help drive that traffic?
For us, we want to really understand where are we spending our money and how are we doing that? And so how do we measure that as a board to give direction and that to hold staff accountable on those deliverables? Yeah, thank you. I forgot about that. And then the other is that you need to know that the occupancy rates in our properties continue to go high. The average daily rate continues to go high. We do have a couple of problem properties. So that's a struggle. And we thank our staff and police for helping, because that has an impact when people go look at the comments.
Oh, yeah.
Drives down that average also. And so there are some things that we need to do, but it doesn't belong to us. So, but that's really some really great things that that's going on at MBTA. And Regional Council of Mayors does not meet in August, so there's nothing there. And you heard from the Planning Commission, they're doing great. International Festival got good reviews because we sent out surveys and everything, and really a lot of great reviews coming out of those surveys. So that's all I have to give. Anything else? Heather?
No.
Dana? Michelle? With that, we stand adjourned. Thank you, Jenny. You added some. There was nothing else, right?
No, we're good.
Good.
Everybody knows what I know.